Live. Fuck it. We're doing it live.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Eternal Life Fan Club live stream. We're here with Alex from the Transhumania channel, and we're here with Max Anderson. And you guys want to give a little intro in case nobody knows who you are? I think they probably do by now if they watch this channel, but...
Yeah, so with Rowan and Brent, I'm basically the only other life extensionist YouTuber. Oh, and Gennady. Not a lot of us on YouTube, but yeah, I do what Rowan does.
Yeah, and I don't have my own YouTube channel, but I'm a huge life extensionist, and I'm partnering with these guys to create a good YouTube channel. So I'm getting involved in YouTube now. So
Max Anderson.
Super excited.
And you guys want to give a little intro in case nobody knows who you are? I think they probably do by now. Somebody's playing the video, and we hear it.
Yeah, so with Rowan and Brent, I'm basically the only other life extensionist YouTuber. Oh, and Gennady.
I'm hearing...
Not on YouTube, but yeah.
Somebody has the video open in a tab, and it's playing.
I don't have my own YouTube channel, but I'm a huge life extensionist, and I'm partnering with these guys to create a good YouTube channel.
Somebody have the tab open, the video
getting involved
in a stream.
Max Anderson. Excited.
And you guys want to give a little intro in case nobody knows who you are? Oh wait, maybe I do. I think I probably do. Watch. Let me go. Sometimes I do that. No, I don't see it. I don't think I do. Anyways, I don't hear it anymore. Today we're gonna be talking about some different anti-aging strategies, and we have a list. Let's go to our list, and we'll just talk about this. Is for people who maybe are just getting into this, who haven't heard of any, who don't know all the different strategies. You know, there's a lot of different methods for getting to advanced life extension, indefinite life extension, eternal life, as I like to call it and hope for. I'm hoping for eternal life, not just life extension. But let's get into our list. Let's start with the first one.
So the first one is we got anti-aging ingredients, supplements, and herbs. You want to start us off on that?
That is not the first on my one. On the top of my list is strategies for engineered negable senescence.
Oh yeah,
that's
Aubrey Gray.
So I don't have them all memorized by memory. Does anyone? I have. You know,
so you got the first one you got is oncosense. So that's cancer, right? So Aubrey's trying to get into those cells and turn off the telomerase genes in cells that could be cancerous. So that's one. Then there's mitosense, where he wants to put extra genes into mitochondria, or he wants to take mitochondrial genes and put them into the nucleus so that they don't get damaged by like radiation and shit. And then, so yeah, that's oncosense, that's mitosense. And then you got glycosense, which is he's trying to prevent glycation crosslinks by using like a kind of compound that keeps them together or destroys them, like it's an enzyme that destroys them. Then there's what is it? Oncosense, mitosense, lysosense, which is when he's going to take enzymes from like bacteria in the ground and like take the genes out of them and put them into our genes so that the cells can clean up like the garbage, the cellular garbage.
Oh, that's the one where that's why he's visiting cemeteries. He's trying to get the bacteria that feed on dead cadavers in case some of that bacteria can help cleanse our own bodies of that waste, right? It's very smart. I was very impressed when I heard that strategy.
Then there's I think it's a somatosense or like stem cells. That's the one where he uses stem cells. Then the seventh one is apoptosense, which is where some cells are just like senescent cells are just wasting space and fucking up the like cellular chemistry of our bodies. So he's gonna send like apoptotic viruses to make those cells like commit suicide and like, you know, get rid of themselves instead of us getting rid of it for them, you know. So that's sense. Each one is like a different strategy, so he's trying to do them all at once.
And to me,
we're not going to cure aging overnight, but it's a step-by-step process.
Right. I've always been highly impressed with this strategies for engineered negable senescence is because it just seems to make sense where he says, you can't really solve the damage problem. Like, damage is going to accumulate. When we're eating food, the metabolism is going to go, breathing in oxygen, right? It's just damage that's going to be done to the body. And traditional gerontologists have been focusing on like preventative, like how do you prevent the damage? That, to me, Aubrey de Grey says that's kind of a losing cause. Kind of had to just admit the damage is going to happen, but we can mitigate the damage, or we can cleanse the damage, repair the damage as it's happening. And so he has this idea that, okay, let's say we can repair the damage back to when we're 25. The damage happens again, though, and then we have to take more therapies, reverse the damage again to like back to 25. We kind of oscillate between ages if we just keep on taking our therapies.
Yeah. So that's.
Do you have any comments on this particular strategy for anti-aging, Max?
No, I think you guys. I had, this is one of the few that I don't know near as much as you guys about. So yeah, I think you guys have took the lead on this one pretty well.
Heck yeah. There it is on the screen for everyone. Cell loss, cell atrophy, division-obsessed cells, death-resistant cells, mitochondrial mutations, intracellular waste products, extracellular waste products, extracellular matrix stiffening. Those are the damages. And to the right, you have all the different repairs and how to fix them. So
I think that's a really good, strong approach for anything for aging is find what is the core problem. So like clearly he's looking at, okay, what is the cause of aging? Here are all the causes of aging, and here's the approach that can help fix that. So it's a really thought out approach,
yes.
With tackling each and every cause of what we currently know. So it's definitely something that you should utilize for any of these methods that we're.
And I love that it's a play on the idea of the 7 deadly sins, right? 7 deadly things. I just love that. It's cool.
7 deadly sins.
All right, the next one we have anti-aging ingredients, supplements, nootropics, herbs, etc.
Oh, Max just talking about that. Max, you want to start us off?
Yeah.
For anti-aging ingredients,
yeah,
there's so many. Well, so for, gosh, let's you start off, Alex, and I'll go into detail on that.
Sure. So the first thing you want to get rid of is insulin. So there's a lot of things that cause aging, but I'd say the worst cause of them all is that we have scientific evidence for is spiking your insulin too much. So what you want, I'd say the ideal thing you can do is fast. Like the only proven the only proven cure we have for aging, not even a cure, it's more of a way to slow it down, and that's fasting. So there's this thing called the Madison monkey experiment where we tested primates for 20 years. It was like a 20-year long study. And we split them up into 2 groups. One group had to eat 30% of the calories they'd normally eat, and the other group just ate normally. And the monkeys that fasted got an extra 10 years of life. So it's called the Madison monkey experiment. Look it up. But anyway, we created versions of this for humans where one is called calorie restriction, which I don't like because you're basically just eating less, but you're still getting the insulin spike. So let's say you only eat 600 calories a day and you have 6 meals a day of 100 calories. That's still bad, in my opinion. So some other methods we've developed are called intermittent fasting, for example, where you just take maybe an 8-hour period, and you just 12, so like half the day, 12 hours, you don't eat. The other half, 12 hours, you do eat. There's another version of intermittent fasting, and that's called the 8-16 intermittent. It's called the 8-16 fast, where you only eat in a 8-hour window. And there's another version of that called the warrior diet, or the 420 fast, where you only eat in 4 hours and then 20 hours. And there's one I do called OMAD, where you eat once a day, and the other 23 hours you fast completely. And then so that's called OMAD, and it stands for 1 meal a day.
Okay. Yeah.
Then there's an even more extreme version of that called alternate day fasting, and Max could probably speak more about that. But it's essentially what we're trying to do is minimize insulin spikes. So that's the first nutritional thing you can do to stop aging. There's also longer fasts, like the 3-day fasts, 5-day fasts.
What's the longest fast you guys have done? I did a 5-day
heard
fast
of
one time.
Walter Longo? Walter Longo has a bunch of research on like prolonged fasting periods. The longest I've ever done was 4 days, and I know that sounds like hell, but after the first day, you just don't feel hungry. You feel like you could go for years and years and years of not eating. So trust me, there's an exponential curve to like how well you're able to tolerate fasting.
Yeah, so the prolonged fast, the major benefits that you're getting from the prolonged fast is the anti-aging, the autophagy is what it's called. Autophagy is when your cells are regenerating, and that's
think of it as like anatomical Darwinism. So the Darwinism.
We skipped ahead a little bit. We have on the list lifestyle fasting.
Yes.
We're getting into lifestyle already.
Yeah, exactly. So this is more like think of it as anatomical Darwinism. The strong survive and the weak perish. But this is at the cellular level, right? So you've got cells that are weak. They've taken too much damage to the DNA. They're not working as well as the other cells. And basically, by eating so much, you're propping up the weak. It's like a bailout for corporations. You're propping up corporations that suck when you should just let them die. And this is basically fasting is a version of like a recession for the body. So during a recession, the bad corporations or the bad cells perish, where the ones that are actually doing useful shit survive. And autophagy is the way in which that happens. So if a cell doesn't get enough to eat, it's just going to kill itself. And you want that to happen. You want senescent cells to kill themselves, and you want good cells to survive. And the more you fast, the easier it is to do that. So Walter Longo has a program called the fasting mimicking diet, where you ingest certain kinds of food that sort of you're allowed to eat during these fasts, but it's meant to like optimize the death of these senescent cells. So that's one thing you can do is take out insulin, and I think that's the most proven scientific way of delaying aging. The next is inflammation. So inflammation is you want to reduce that because there's several ways of doing that too. This is not related to fasting, but I think the best thing you can do is cut out all these like bullshit synthetic oils, like the fucking sunflower oil, fucking what is it, canola oil.
Yeah, those are horrible.
All these fucking they're called vegetable oils.
Soybean oil.
It's such a huge corporate misnomer because they're not vegetable oils. They're fucking bean oils, like soybean oil. And like you take these crops and you concentrate oils that were never meant to be concentrated. Our bodies have not evolved to ingest this kind of shit.
Right.
And you want to cut that out. So that's one way you get rid of inflammation. Another way to do that is to reduce the amount of fat cells you got. So there's two kinds of fat cells. You got your what's it called? You got like your outer fat cells, and then you got your visceral fat cells. So
adipose fat tissue.
Yeah. So when you grab your stomach, those are the fat cells you can get rid of the easiest. The harder ones to get rid of are the ones around your organs. So that's the visceral fat. Mm-hmm. And there's plenty of ways of doing that. I think people have talked about like cold showers getting rid of visceral fat. I'm not too sure about that, but that's one way in which you can trick your body to converting like white fat into brown fat. So brown fat is metabolically active, so that you want to convert white fat into brown fat because you can get rid of it more easily. But so that's inflammation. Another thing you want to reduce is cortisol. So cortisol is related to like stress, right? Long-term stress. I'd say like the best thing you can do for that is just fucking sleep. Just because when you're awake for long periods of time, your body thinks you can't sleep because there's something chasing you, so it's getting you stressed out and it's making more cortisol. You don't want to make cortisol. So yeah, get rid of it. Get rid of insulin. Get rid of inflammation. Get rid of cortisol. And then I guess another thing you could do is like raise your testosterone. For at least for men, testosterone is like, I know people associate that with like toxic masculinity and shit, but like for men, like that's the hormone of life. Like
and it's been proven that fasting increases your growth hormones too. Part of autophagy is it increases your growth hormone naturally. So
exactly. Get this: if you exercise in a fasted state, you get even more growth hormone, and that's so counterintuitive. People are like, "Oh, when you're exercising in a fasted state, it's going to degrade your muscles," but that's not what happens. What happens is your body is like, "Oh, okay, it looks like you're struggling to survive, so let's make sure this doesn't happen again. Here's a bunch of fucking growth hormone and testosterone to get you through these hard times." So it's super counterintuitive how the body works when you're fasting. Because it is good for you, and you're actually not breaking down muscle. You're going to use fat before muscle because that's like you need your muscle to survive. when you're fasting for say like small periods, like 8 hours, it's going to like use both protein and both protein and fat. But when you fast for long periods of time, it stops consuming the protein and starts consuming the fat. So the longer you fast, the better. So you see
not
how
just the instant levels of fasting too, but imagine when your body is not eating all the time and your body is focused solely now just on cell regeneration. If you're eating all the time, your cells are so focused and so busy on just eating, focused on the food and detoxing the food, everything else. And if you just give all your cells in your body a break of a fasted state, then your body can start focusing on the actual healing processes and everything else that's so beneficial to your body rather than, everything else. And it doesn't get to that point if you're eating all the time, because if you're eating all the time, it never has the time to really focus on the regeneration aspect and everything else, because your body is so focused on all the food that you're eating and it doesn't have any time for anything else on top of that. So there's so many great benefits to the fasting. But for the supplement side of things, one of the supplements that I can speak to that I take that I love is Protandim. And Protandim is a supplement, all natural ingredients. It turns on, it's a what's called a NRF2 activator. It turns on a gene called superoxide dismutase. And the superoxide dismutase kills 1 million free radicals per second, every second throughout the day. And we all know free radicals is what causes oxidative stress and causes aging. So the best example that I can come up with oxidative stress. So if you take a bite of an apple and you leave that apple, say on a kitchen counter for, even like an hour or 30 minutes, it turns brown and gross, right? That's oxidative stress. That's an example of oxidative stress. So if you can have an enzyme that naturally in your own body that kills 1 million free radicals per second, that's so much better than all these other products that are saying, hey, buy this antioxidant. Because what an antioxidant does is one antioxidant kills one free radical. Like that, come on. You'd have to buy 1 million antioxidants every second to just do what Protandim does every second naturally from your own enzymes. So that's the key, is your own enzymes in our body are so much more powerful and so much more effective and efficient than all these other, products that people push on you. So
have you heard if Protandim increases glutathione? Because that's like the body's master antioxidant.
Absolutely. Glutathione is huge.
Yeah, that's why I take NAC, N-acetylcysteine, because it's supposed to really boost your levels of glutathione. And that's like super important. And then I also chaga mushroom is supposed to be like super high in antioxidants and
there's a lot
superoxide dismutase and everything like that.
So we've talked about like antioxidants and like fasting and stuff and inflammation and like insulin spikes. Let's talk about something else that'll help that. So let's talk about it, like lectin and ghrelin. So lectin and ghrelin are also these hormones that control your appetite. So you're going to find it hard to fast if you're constantly putting yourself in situations where you're hungrier. And again, one thing you can do to influence these hormones is like lifestyle factors. So lectin, that's the hormone that makes you think, okay, I'm full. Like your body's going to send that out and it's like, okay, stop eating. And then ghrelin is the opposite. So think like yin and yang, like the one does the opposite of the other. So ghrelin is the hormone that makes you hungry. So like I don't know how to remember that. Like think of like gremlins, and gremlins like to like eat shit. So ghrelin. That's how I remember it. But so the way you manipulate these is, one thing you can do is, again, sleep. Because sleep, when your body's awake for long periods of time, it goes into like panic mode, and your body thinks like, oh, you should eat as much as possible to like survive. So upregulate ghrelin and downregulate lectin. So yeah, so this is just a couple of ways to like optimize your endocrine system. So just to recap: insulin, glucagon, which is like the opposite of insulin, lectin and ghrelin, which are also opposites, cortisol, testosterone, and estrogen. Remember these 7 hormones and optimize your lifestyle to produce the optimal hormonal profile. And that'll, it's all interconnected: fasting, sleep, diet. So let's get into like actual supplements you can take. So one way in which you can sort of optimize this lifestyle is like the ketogenic diet. This is one thing I take. It's called beta hydroxybutyrate. So you can take like what are called MCTs, medium chain triglycerides, which you can find in like coconut oil and like what's it called? All these like good fats. Let's say, and instead of taking that, you can just take the ketones, which is the beta hydroxybutyrate. It's like it's going to produce the ketones and trick your body into thinking you're already moving towards a ketogenic state. So your body's going to use the ketones instead of like the carbohydrates. So that's one thing you can do to. That's one thing you can take to sort of optimize your lifestyle. There's other diets we can go over. We can go over the vegan diet.
Why it's so important. So basically, for everybody that doesn't understand the ketogenic diet, it's basically taking 75% of your diet is of fats, 20% protein, and then really small, like 5% carbs. And the reason for that is, like Alex said, it's trying to switch your body into utilizing fats or ketones as energy rather than carbs. So naturally, our body uses carbs as our primary energy source. And you want to change that to fats, because then your body starts working on fat cells for energy and burning that rather than burning the carbs and sugars that you eat throughout the day. So your body naturally switches that. If your body doesn't have a surplus of carbs to use, it's naturally just going to use the most utilized source that the body has, which if you're eating 70% healthy fats, it's obviously fat. So that's what. Do
you guys eat peanut butter in your ketogenic diets?
So peanut butter is
ketogenic,
good,
right? Pretty much.
Peanut butter has a lot of hydrogenized oils, and it's not. I'm not pronouncing it correctly.
It depends on which brand of peanut butter you take. Yeah. Some have more polysaturated than saturated. Basically, what you want is peanut butter that looks more like peanut oil. So if it's very like oily and like liquid, that's what you want. If it's like very if it's very buttery, like kind of avoid it. Avoid like the mainstream like corporate brands where you can look on the back and you'll see the fucking like oil and shit. Like ditch that. Get the peanut butter that's actually just ground up peanuts.
Just peanuts. You get it at Trader Joe's. Cheap.
And technically, if you want to go a step farther than that, peanuts isn't the healthiest nut. There's actually healthier butters. Macadamia nuts is one of the healthiest keto-friendly nuts. There's macadamia nut butter that I have that tastes, I think, even better than peanut butter. So you definitely check that out.
So I think peanut butter is the healthiest nut. It's not even a nut; it's a legume, but I think it's the healthiest, personally.
So yeah, whatever you take, the whole point is you want to optimize your medium chain fatty acids. And if you don't want to do that, just take ketones themselves, and you can sort of get like a blood glucose monitor and see if you're in ketosis yet and stuff like that. Anyway, another practice you can do is counting your macros. So Max said what percentage of your diet should be fats, carbs, and proteins. So like you said, you want to maximize fats, minimize protein, minimize carbs. And the way I do it is I kind of set a limit for myself. So my limit is 40 grams of carbohydrates. So you got to start checking the back of everything you eat and then start doing math in your head so you never go over the 40 grams.
40 total grams or net?
Per day.
Is it net carb? Do you go based off net carbs or total carbs?
Total carbs. And then for proteins, I put the limit at 100 because I know some people who like to bodybuild are like, man, I need my 200 grams and whatnot. Trust me, if you get lean before you get ripped, you'll have an easier time getting ripped. So what you want to do is you want to decrease your body fat percentage. And once you're at like 12%, then you can go back to like a protein-based diet. But do keto first and then protein. So that's for the bodybuilders out there. It's better for your body that way because the way you build muscle is exponential. So if you're like a fat guy, right, and you go try and build muscle, the fat and muscle are like catabolic and anabolic to each other. So the more fat you have, the harder it is to build muscle. While the more muscle you have, the easier it is to gain fat. So you want to get lean before you get big. So get rid of all the fat first, and then you're going to find it's a lot easier to put on muscle. Or if you don't want to put on muscle at all, then just stay with the ketogenic diet for life. But there's an order in which you can do different diets to maximize the body type you want. So yeah, that's diets. That's
like we talked about with the growth hormone increasing for a fasted state. That's by far the best time to be working out is when you have that high growth hormones. Your body is ready, And in particular, if you're talking about the best type of workout for the fasted state is high interval training. So high interval training is considered the best training for when you're on a fasted state.
Yes, that's another thing we can get into is a high intensity interval training, which is HIIT or HIIT, HIIT. So one version of that is called Tabata training. So Tabata, I think it was a Japanese scientist by the name of like Nakajima Tabata, and he invented this way of training where you try to simulate 30 minutes of like anaerobic exercise or aerobic exercise with just 5 minutes of aerobic exercise. So the way you do that is you let's take running for example. You want to split it into intervals where you're sprinting for 20 minutes and then jogging for 20 minutes. You're sprinting for 20 seconds and then you're jogging for 10 seconds. And then you're sprinting for 20 seconds and then jogging for 10 seconds. It's going to tire the fuck out of you. So you can't do this for long, but you want to do 8 reps of it. So do that for like maybe 8 reps. That's about 4 minutes. 20, 10, 20, 10, 20, 10. And then just take a deep breath. You're probably like fucking gasping for air by the end of that. But basically what you've done is you've simulated half an hour of fucking just jogging with running and jogging. So, because they'll take you can take like your blood work and see how it changes when you exercise intensely versus exercising in a relaxed way. So that's one thing you could do. Rowan and Niall, we'll do like a running thing to show you guys, like you did with Gennady. But we'll have the way I do it is I have like a timer around my neck, and it beeps every 20 seconds, and then beeps 10 seconds, and then beeps 20 seconds, and then I just switch from running and jogging. So that's a great way to think of this like the ketogenic diet and like losing weight in general. Think of it as like a mathematical equation. So you have the input, which is whatever you eat, and then you have the output, which is whatever you exercise and whatever you use in your day-to-day life. So let's say you use 2,000 calories sedentary. So if you're sitting around like a fucking potato and just watching YouTube videos all day, that's your 200. You only need 2,000 calories.
You guys, I have been running now. I started running pretty much every day for the last 3 days.
So basically, yeah. So let's assume like you're a potato. Let's say you're my body weight and my age and my height and whatnot, and you need that 2,000 calories just to get by. That's the neutral amount. If you're just a potato and you sit around watching YouTube videos all day, so you're not going to burn any fat, but you're not going to gain any fat either. But let's say you add some high intensity interval training, and maybe that'll take like 400 calories off your 2,000. So now you can like factor that in and find out how much fat you're losing. But let's say you decide to cut your 2,000 calories through fasting. Let's say I'm only going to eat 1,000 calories a day, and I'm only going to eat once a day. So now you're losing a lot more fat.
Right.
So I'm a big fat guy, so I know what I'm talking about. Like maybe not a big fat guy, maybe just chubby. I don't know what to do. Like for obese people, I think obese people have a lot more problems than just like an appetite. They do everything wrong metabolically. So
and there's easy ways to what Alex is talking about right now. There's easy ways to figure out that. So you can check out your BMR, which is what he said, your basal metabolic rate. Yeah. That's what just sedentary. Even you just stay in bed, sleep all day, that you still burn a lot of calories. That's your BMR. And then if you exercise, that's what's called the total daily expenditure, TDEE. There's plenty of calculators online that you guys can check, TDEE, and check out what your calculator is for how much exercise you put in plus your basal metabolic rate. So
exactly what Max said. So what you want to do is like take this equation, find out what rate you're burning fat at, what rate you're I don't like to say losing weight because you don't want to lose weight, right? You want to lose fat. Like if you're losing weight, you could also be losing muscle. You want to lose fat, and the way you do this is ketogenic diet. But anyway, try to optimize that equation so you're being as active as possible and eating as little as possible, and you're eating as infrequently as possible. So yeah,
you don't want to go too low though. You don't want to go too low on that. Usually, they always recommend don't go any lower than about 500 to 1,000 calories at the very most for calorie deficit. And the reason why you don't want to go too big of a calorie deficit, because then your body starts adapting to that calorie deficit and realizing, okay, this is now going to be my new BMR, my basal metabolic rate. And then when you have a lower BMR, lower calorie deficit, now your body's used to having that amount of calories. Now you have to lower even more. So your body always is going to do everything it takes to survive. And if your body's realizing that I'm only getting less calories, it's going to start changing its metabolism to live that lifestyle, basically. So you don't want that. You still want your metabolism working for you in the best way, in the best possible way for you. And by doing that, you want to maintain your calories to a point where you're not having too big of a deficit. But if you stay within 500 calorie deficit, you should be fine.
Yeah.
500 calories less than your TDEE, by the way, not your BMR.
And you're also probably wondering, like, what's good? Like, how long should I fast for? How long should I work out for? How little should I eat? And that's, I got to be honest, that's different for everybody. And one thing we should get out of the way is that life isn't fair. Some people are going to have different genetics that let them do this easily, whereas for some people, like obese people, it's going to be more difficult. And like a lot of people like to say, like, anyone can do anything. That's not really true. If you're like really, really fucking obese, there might be something wrong with you metabolically that you can't do. You can't imitate the lifestyles of other people. So you might have to do more work. And we got to talk about this whole like body positivity movement where like we glorify obesity and
find
glorify
a good picture for that.
So here's the thing. I'm not trying to create like some kind of like narrative between what bodies are attractive and what bodies are unattractive and structuring your life based around that. What I'm trying to say is what would you like to live a long time? And if you will, then you have to take a transhumanist approach to your obesity. You can't be like I'm just big boned. It's just my genetics. You can fight your genetics by applying transhumanist principles to them. And you're going to have to accept that some people have to do more work than other people. And if you truly want to live a longer life, you have to put in the work. So that's all I have to say about that. Yeah. So we talked about lifestyle, supplements.
Some people say that life is like a box of chocolates. It doesn't last as long for fat people.
Never know what you're gonna get.
That's one way to put it. But yeah, so we got lifestyle factors, diet, supplements. Next thing on our list is cryonics. So Max, do you want to talk about your cryonics experiences?
Yeah, so I think I'm the only one here that is actually in the process of becoming a member of Cryonics. So right now there's currently two major cryonics institutes. There's the Cryonics Institute in Michigan, and then there's Alcor. So both are great places that you can go. Kind of the biggest difference between the two, other than the scientific and how they go about it, is that they of course have different science with how the vitrification process works. But the main difference is CI in Michigan is a little cheaper than Alcor. Alcor currently right now $200,000 for a whole body, and right now for the head you can do $80,000. Basically, cryopreservation is preserving the human body after death and allowing and they call it a patient because they don't consider them death or dead yet, and in hopes that the future technologies or the future man will be able to revive them. The reason why I'm a member is obviously my priority number one is to not die. So my priority number one is to conquer aging and find a cure or everything else for aging. And I feel confident that we will be able to do that in Immortality, but it's a contingency plan. Just in case if I can't find it in my lifetime, I would much rather be cryonically preserved rather than, have maggots eating at me, and living under the ground. Right. So that's what I'm currently doing. Me personally, I am doing my entire body. So $200,000. I know that that's a lot of money. A lot of people probably don't have that money, but they have great options for allowing everybody to afford it through life insurance. So you can have your life insurance policy pay for your cryonics bill. And that's what I'm currently doing through mine. So great method. And there's several ways. I told you guys a little bit about the vitrification process and how they do that. They have it's basically an antifreeze that goes throughout your body, replaces the blood in your body with an antifreeze, which prevents ice crystallization of your cells. And that's important because when we defrost the patients from Alcor, when you take them out of the tanks, and these ice crystals form they expand and destroy all our cells when we defrost. And that's terrible. That would basically destroy us. And so that's why they have that vitrification, but it is toxic. So, basically the hopes is with Alcor is hoping the future technologies can not just conquer aging and immortality, but also conquer the damage of the cryoprotectant that they're putting in, the vitrification, the toxicity of that, and as well as prevent ice crystals forming and crystallization. So Alex has a really good alternative to cryonics that is better in what he thinks in terms of preventing the instead of using the vitrification process, instead of having to worry about the defrosting of the expansion. So go ahead and go, Alex.
So we've got two competing theories of cryonics right now. The first is vitrification. That's what Alcor does. That's what Michigan, the Cryonics Institute in Michigan does. And then we have an alternative theory called aldehyde stabilized cryopreservation. But before we can talk about that, we have to talk about I know you guys hate philosophy, but we have to talk about philosophy. We have to talk about what death technically means, right? Because Rowan, he has his concerns about cryonics.
Anyone subscribed to this channel probably loves philosophy, probably.
So, like philosophically, let's define death, right? What is death? What do you think death is, Rowan?
Death is ceasing to exist.
Great, that's a great start. So, let's talk about what it means to cease to exist. What part of us defines our existence?
The brain, the physical body.
The physical body, good. Let's start with that. So what is our physical body? Vital processes. We got circulation, we got respiration, we got thinking, we got sort of the brainstem, which allows your heart to operate, it allows your stomach to operate, it allows your liver to operate. We can call these vital processes, right? So let's define death as the loss of capacity to sustain our vital processes. That's great, right? We can start with that as like a first principles. So what are the conditions under which this can persist? And there's different theories of death, and where the idea of what life and death is very ambiguous, so to speak, because it could refer to like the intactness of the human form that allows those processes to work, or it could refer to the intactness of the information that allows those processes to work. So we really like the number 7 here, right? The 7 causes of death, 7 hormones, 7 theories of aging.
Love it.
Why don't we have let's go over 7 theories of death? So we could go over them one by one, and we'll see which one you agree with and whether cryonics is for you or not. So the first theory, we can call that, let's call it like a medical death, right? So medical death. That's when you, let's say it's the termination of your, so you're on the hospital table, your heart ceases to beat, your blood stops going through your brain, and the doctor declares you dead. So there's some problems with that, because this can be overcome by revival or resuscitation back to the human form. So let's say somebody undergoes medical death at my workplace. I grab the fucking what's it called? It's a word I'm looking for.
Defibrillator.
That's it. I'm gonna grab it. Clear. I shock his fucking heart back into beating, and he has gained a second life. So some people are like, oh, well, he's fucking dead because his consciousness has been interrupted. But that depends if you consider consciousness that valuable. Like, do you think he's now 2 people? Like, one person died and he's now a new person who's born again with the same memories because his consciousness was interrupted? I don't think so. I think there is a certain teleological continuity in me fucking zapping him back into existence, whereby he's able to continue his perception of his own identity. Yes, so that's the first theory. The first theory is medical death. Let's talk about the second theory, anatomical or structural death. So this is when the human body disintegrates, and it can. But let's say your heart is beating, and so it's like consider it there's this word we have called homeostasis, where all the processes of the body work together to create stability. So you got circulation, respiration, and this homeostasis is that stability. So let's say, what if not only your heart stops beating, your homeostasis is disintegrated? But I think this can also be overcome, by reassembly or reconstitution. So let's say death might be the point where you get to a kind of threshold where where the like let's say your heart gets taken out of your body. Your heart's not only does it stop, but it's like malfunctioned. It's not going to work. So what we could do is we could take out your heart and replace it with another heart. And just like with the defibrillator, the zapping your heart back to existence, you now have another heart that's equivalent to the previous heart. So if I resuscitate you and bring you back with that new heart, are you alive? So that's what's called anatomical or structural death versus medical death. So I think putting that new heart in you doesn't fundamentally change who you are if it's an equivalent heart. It could be grown with your own stem cells. It could be like a pig heart that's like seeded with human stem cells. How much of that matters depends on what your personal philosophy is. So the people who believe that you are still you after this form of death are called animalists. I have a video about that on my channel. And I think it was pioneered by I think John Olson, like a philosopher. He's the term animalist. And also like human immortalists, like Sergio Canavero, who thinks you can take a transplanted head, put it on another body, maybe like a clone body of you. You kill the fucking clone. I know this is super unethical, but you kill the fucking clone and put your head on it. So that would be an example of structural death being overcome. I think that's absolutely possible. So we got medical theory of death, structural theory of death. I want to talk about the third theory of death now. We're going to talk about physiological or functional death, where not only does the structures of your body become disintegrated, but when you reassemble them, they're a different kind of homeostasis. So this is where Rowan might start becoming concerned about whether you're still you or not. And
like cremated, like being cremated, that's the worst.
Yeah, so resuscitation can overcome medical theory of death, and reassembly can overcome the structural theory of death. There's a way we can overcome functional death, and I think it's called reanimation. So reanimation is this is where we get to cryonics, like Max was talking about. So let's say you get, I don't know, let's say you have like an irreversible disease. What's an irreversible disease you guys want to entertain?
Alzheimer's.
Let's say you get fucking Alzheimer's, right? So now the amyloid beta proteins are degrading the structures of your brain such that your homeostasis is no longer the same. And then you sign up for cryonics and you put your body in a fucking freezer, and then you get revived 400 years later. And they find that, oh shit, this isn't going to be as simple as replacing your heart. We got to replace a bunch of shit. And your body, if we thaw you out, it might not still be functional. So this is called functional death. That's what cryonics is to me. And the people who believe it can be overcome are called personists, and they believe in reanimation. So let's say maybe, Max had pancreatic cancer. We can't just bring his body back and put a new pancreas in, because the cancer cells are all over his fucking circulatory system, all over his body. The cancer is just going to come back. So we have to fundamentally change the way in which Max's body is structured. Let's say the cancer hasn't spread to his head yet. So we give Max a cyborg body with a human head. This is where it gets kind of creepy. So you know how like the human immortalists believe in like structural death can be overcome, but not functional death. Transhuman immortalists believe functional death can be overcome too. So these are people like Max Moore. He'd probably be perfectly fine with having a fucking cyborg body and a human head. So that's Max the third theory of death.
CEO of Alcor Cryonics, by the way.
Yeah, that's the Max Moore. He's the CEO. He used to be like one of the philosophers that pioneered transhumanism, but he kind of shifted to just running a company. It's a nice peaceful existence where you don't have to engage with academia too much. So that's the third theory of death. Let's talk about the fourth theory of death, and this is where Rowan is probably going to have some huge objections. The fourth theory of death is biological death. So the death of living DNA-based organisms, where never again can you have the biological homeostasis. And there's a group of people, just like the longevists think you can overcome medical death. The animalists think you can overcome structural death. The personists think you can overcome functional death. There's people called mindists who think you can overcome the biological death. Because what doesn't matter is biology doesn't matter. What matters is the mind. And there's so many ways you can define that. So they call this substitution or rebirth. So let's say the same thing happens, but this time Max has brain cancer instead of just Alzheimer's. So what do you do when Max has brain cancer? What do you do when his brain is not able to be salvaged? Well, the information is still in there, right? What if you can copy the information and then put it into a new substrate and then just let that brain die? So this is where you get to like mind uploading. And Rowan, maybe you want to critique mind uploading for us?
Yeah, well, I have a number of objections to this. Let's say like you copy your mind somewhere else. There's no real guarantee that the actual transfer of consciousness has taken place. That it might just be a copy of you, essentially like a pattern of information that is acting like it's you, but it's not you. Because it's like you're trapped in your brain and you copy the information somewhere else. It's just like, okay, that's a different person. You've literally created another person that's like acting like you. That's what I'm concerned with. And then there's also the concern that if you're mind uploaded, essentially you're at the mercy of whatever software you're programmed into, whatever computer. You could be hacked and you could be deleted. You know, you could be altered. There's that whole concern as well. So I don't know. I just want to stick to the biological body because that's what we know. That's what we know. We know for sure our consciousness can exist in this fashion, in this form. We don't know. It's all hypothetical that our consciousness can exist on a different substrate and computer chips and all this sort of thing. Yeah, that's basically the gist of it. What do you guys think? I mean, what are your concerns?
So, Max,
I think there's two really good good examples of mind uploading. So, if you know the current show right now, HBO, Westworld, really good show. You know, everybody, there's a point in which, spoiler alert, so if you haven't seen Westworld, you know, stop here. But there's a point in which there's a scene where they're running off a cliff. They're all dying physically, but they're all going into a field of, you know, their happiness. So they had no idea that they just died physically, but they're just in this field. So basically, you would have no idea that you're physically dead, but you're just in this other world. So kind of a good example of a mind upload would be like putting yourself in a video game, or even just dreaming. When you're dreaming of something that's completely irrelevant to reality, you're in a complete other reality, but you have no idea that this reality is not the actual reality. So it is a very interesting concept of mind uploading. But that you know, that's the question, is how can is everything able? Are we able to upload literally everything about us? Are we going to be the same person, or is it, you know, those are the key obstacles to that. So Transcendence is another great movie that you guys can watch about uploading consciousness. Really great movie with Johnny Depp with mind uploading.
Yeah, I remember that one. So, and the end of that movie, I think they show the gray goo idea, where there's the nanobots that just kind of swarm and take over everything. That's the gray goo, right? You talk about that, Alex. Pretty cool.
Yeah. So they've critiqued biological death. I'm going to critique it too. So essentially, what do you mean? What do we mean by life and death? So what is life? Life is DNA, right? It's fucking biological organisms replicating their DNA. It's like a physical cellular thing that uses DNA as the template. So when you get rid of all biology, are you alive or are you dead? Like a fucking silicon chip is not the same thing as a self-replicating piece of DNA. So this is where the concept of biological death becomes very, very controversial. And most people, like especially like these very, very conservative Christian people who are like, nope, fucking mind uploading is going to kill you. So they'll call it like Satanism. I think that's stupid because it has nothing to do with Satan. But anyway, a lot of these people think the absence of DNA is death. The absence of life is death. So death is just the absence of life. But there's some people who define death differently, and we could call them connectionists or posthuman immortalists. So like just as you have the human immortalists who think we can overcome structural death, and you have the transhuman immortalists who think we can overcome functional death, there's also posthuman immortalists who think you can overcome biological death, because the idea of what it means to be alive is a pattern, not a biological thing. So essentially,
and just to be clear, everybody, we're already seeing these changes right now. Just think about it like this in the world of medicine right now, because people, what he talked about earlier, we initially thought the human body was dead the moment that the heart stops. That was initially the way of saying that the guy is dead, declared dead. But then defibrillators came out, then ways of which we can restart the heart and revive them, right? So no longer is that the way of death. So then after that, it was talking about brain death. Once you're brain dead, you're dead. So that's the current method right now of death, is the brain dead. But who's to say that that isn't going to change with other forms of ways in terms of uploading the mind and all those other things? So We're just giving you examples of why this is in reality something feasible, because it's already happening.
The brain, like the neuron, does the idea of a brain require a neuron, or can you have a synthetic neuron? Can you have nanobots going into your brain and replacing each neuron individually so you don't lose the continuity of consciousness? I wonder what Rowan would think about that if you had, like, say, a bunch of nanobots coming, attached to your neurons, and then wrap around the neurons and then kill the neuron and take its place. Do you think that could be possible? Do you think this could be a way to overcome biological death?
Possibly. That sounds more convincing to me than the alternate form of uploading. I guess what a little skeptical of that is, I don't know, like when it comes to the consciousness, where is the actual consciousness? Where's the soul or whatever? What is that thing that makes you you? Some people throughout history have thought that it's the pineal gland, and like ancient cultures used to call, I think it was the Egyptians or whatever, they would call the pineal gland the seat of the soul. So what if there's, for instance, a certain biological material that we cannot replace? Like, what if there's, like, the pineal gland, for instance, actually carries the seat of the soul? It's like that part where you cannot replace it in any way. If you tried to come in with nanobots, you'd be replacing it with some type of alternate material that does not cut it. It cannot hold the soul or whatever. There's that whole idea that makes me a little scared as well. But I'm open to the possibility that if you replace one cell by cell, like you're saying, it's the most feasible form of mind uploading I've heard of.
It is. So one thing that's really fascinating is I went to the Mayo Clinic, which is arguably one of the best hospitals in the world. It's voted on the best hospital in the world. And I asked one of the lead doctors that what is the most exciting form of research for future medicine? And this lead doctor there at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, said molecular nanotechnology. If we can really focus on that molecular nanotechnology, having small nanobots that can go out through your body and heal cells at a molecular level, little microscopic bots that can heal all your cells at a molecular level, that essentially will cure all diseases, cure all of aging, everything. It's a really fascinating topic that it isn't explored as much, isn't talked about as much. But the Mayo Clinic realizes that it's such a fascinating, that's their number one most exciting futuristic medicine, is molecular nanotechnology. So
so we critiqued biological death for a bit. Let's talk about how we can possibly maybe overcome it. So in the Western philosophy, we had Descartes, who Rowan just talked about the pineal gland. Descartes believed the pineal gland was the seat of the soul, that which connects the material world to the immaterial world. And but there's, in Eastern philosophy, there is no separate worlds. Like let's take Buddhism, for example. In Buddhism, there's only one world, which is the not a material world or a spiritual world. It's a combination of both, and that's the only world. So in a sense, the Buddhists might not think there's a difference between a carbon atom and a silicon atom. They might not think there's a difference between a mechanical neuron and a biological neuron. Because let's say consciousness begins at the electron or the proton, or not. Silicon atoms and carbon atoms are made of the same protons and electrons. So if consciousness begins at the proton or the electron, then the carbon atom is just as conscious as the silicon atom. So a neuron made from carbon atoms would be just as conscious as a silicon atom, a silicon neuron made from silicon atoms. So the people who believe you could overcome this are called posthuman immortalists, and they think like we're kind of bigoted towards bigoted towards non-biological systems, when in fact biological systems are also non-biological systems. So they think the idea of life and death or living and non-living, biotic and abiotic, is a social construct. There's no difference between living things and non-living things. They're both equally conscious. So even a rock is kind of conscious. It's just not as conscious as we are because we're more complicated. We have more feedback loops in our brain where the rock doesn't. But if you could make the rock to be in the shape of our brain, maybe the rock would be conscious too, just as conscious as we are. So these people do believe you could like upload your mind to a robot with no biological material on it, and it would be just as conscious as you and believe it's just as conscious as you. So that's the idea of how you could maybe overcome biological death. So this is the fourth theory of death. Let's talk about the fifth theory of death, and Max is really going to like this one. It's called information death, a death of the ego, a death of the soul, if you will. So a being could never exist in that previous state ever again, as in, let's say you get hit by a car and then the worms decompose your body, they decompose your brain, and the information of how your brain is shaped is lost forever. That's a new kind of death, because not only can you not cryonically freeze them and extract the information, you can't. A new person in that same pattern of information, the pattern of information is lost. The pattern of your brain connections has been decomposed into the ground, gone forever. So this is called information death, and this being can never exist in that in a system, be it biological or mechanical. That is a new kind of death. Would you guys agree that that's like finally what constitutes the death?
That is the death that, as we talked about, Max Moore, the CEO of Alcor, he believes that is who we are as a person. So he was asked a question. It's on YouTube somewhere, but he was asked a question specifically, what do you consider death? And what do you consider as the who we are as a person? What do we need to preserve? And the answer to that question was memories. Our memories. So basically information, our memories is who we are as a person. So once our memories are gone, he feels that that's who we are as a person. So once that's gone, basically the memories or the information that we've consumed throughout our years, there's no point anymore of reviving us anymore, because now everything that made us who we are, that made us unique, is now gone. So it is a very that's his belief on death, and I believe that too myself. I believe our memories is what separates us individually, and that's who we are as a person individually.
I watched an interview with Max Moore one time. We should have a whole stream discussing this interview, because the way I interpreted what Max Moore was saying, and many people in the chat, the comment section, also interpreted, is that Max Moore basically was fine with a copy of himself being created, and that even if it wasn't his consciousness, okay, that there would just be a copy of him with his exact same pattern information, even if it wasn't his exact consciousness, just a copy. He basically acted like that's satisfactory, like that's what he's going for. I mean, that's like his goal essentially. I mean, to me, it's like meaningless. Like, if it doesn't preserve your actual consciousness, what does it matter if there's a copy of you somewhere? What does it matter if there's like all these Rowans out there, but they're not me? It's just a different form of a legacy. It's a very advanced form of the legacy,
Exactly. It's kind of like the example of just talk to a very deep stage, a deep stage. Gosh, I can't even think. What's not Parkinson's, but Alzheimer's. Yeah, talk to somebody that's in deep stage Alzheimer's, and talk to them. Are they who they are anymore when they're like, they can't even remember who you are? They don't even know who they are. They don't know who they're, like even their daughter, they don't even recognize their own daughter. Like, are they technically pretty much essentially a new person? Like, that's the key is do you consider that's basically what we're talking about right now, because that person has lost all memory, all the memories of who they are, uniqueness, everything. Are they essentially basically, that's what we're talking about? Are they dead essentially? Because for everything that was about them, that what made them unique is now gone because of their memories.
Yep, that's the information death. So it looks like both Rowan and Max have a lot to say about like information death, and how that maybe truly is the death of you, even if you have all these fancy technologies. Like, let's say Max freezes himself in the cryonics facility, and then we have total anarchy somewhere 100 years down the road, and people start smashing shit up. They smash up the cryonics facility where Max is. The nitrogen stops getting into the tank, and then his body decomposes. He becomes food for worms. No matter what kind of technology we have in the future, we can never assemble Max back the way he was, be it biologically or non-biologically, and that's called information death. And he seems to like feel very strongly about that. But I suppose I could play devil's advocate. So you talked about Alzheimer's earlier. So Max, he's what he's telling us is he's telling us that if the memories are gone, you are no longer the same person. This is an information death. So he's saying Alzheimer's is a form of information death. Would you guys in the comments, would you agree with that? That if you get Alzheimer's, that's actually worse than like things like cancer, because you are dying without the possibility for reassembling the information in your brain.
Totally. Totally. It's the worst. It's the worst. That's been my worst fear of a disease since a long time. Alzheimer's. It's like, oh crap.
There's what I could do is I could play devil's advocate for the information theory of death. I'm going to just be very controversial and say maybe you can overcome information death. And there's many different theories proposed for doing that. But first, let's talk about like the death of information, the death of memories. Let's take Joe Biden, for instance. Joe Biden is let's just say he's not very well mentally. He's let's say that there's the possibility that he advances to the debates with Donald Trump. And in the middle of the debates, his dementia starts getting worse and worse. And let's say he forgets that it's the year 2020, and he thinks we're still back in the 1960s or 1950s with Jim Crow. And he's like, oh, what's this Negro doing on stage? And then a secret agent's going to come up, Joe, the civil rights movement is a thing. Stop it. So, okay, but let's say Jim Crow Joe is, let's say he's still got parts of his personality, even though his memories of the civil rights movement and shit is all gone. So, let's say he's on stage and you see his personality come out despite his memories being gone. Let's say he's talking about COVID-19. In my day, we called it the Shanghai Shivers. Used to know a guy, Cornflake Jackson, played guitar down by the pool hall. Here's the thing, buckaroo. If Cornflake says Shanghai Shivers ain't no thing, then you can take that to the bank, Jack. So you see his personality is still functional in some way, even though the information that makes up the person, Joe Biden, is gone. So this is where we should distinguish between memory and consciousness. So I think a lot of people who were considering voting for Joe Biden over Donald Trump might stop doing that if he becomes Jim Crow Joe again and he forgets the civil rights movement happened. Because he's like, okay, at that point, you might as well be equal to Trump, because not even Trump voted for segregation. So that's what makes it very interesting, is that the memories define our humanity. Well, they define our personhood, but not our humanity, because Biden is still a conscious being. He's still on stage acting like a conscious being. He's still acting like a sentient, maybe not sapient, but sentient being. And the question is, can you live after losing your memories? And I think there is a couple ways in which you can do that. This is where Rowan talks about the idea of legacy. What if you have a kid? What if you have a kid with the same genetic code as you, but he doesn't have the same memories as you? Let's say you make a clone of yourself, and he has the same genetic potential to develop into you. If you have a kid, is that a way of living forever? What do you guys think?
No.
Nope.
See, the kid wouldn't have the same memories. And I think, that my definition of who we are as a person is the memories that we've had growing up and everything else. Yeah. So the clone wouldn't have any of the same memories, so that it would be totally different people.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting distinction between memory and personality, because if I had a clone of me, he probably would have the same personality. Like, I have the same personality as my parents, even though I'm a different person, but I don't have their memories. I'm not dumb. Even with a clone, let's say Jango Fett and Boba Fett. Jango Fett creates Boba Fett, and Boba Fett has the exact same personality as Jango Fett, the exact same kind of characteristics, the exact same job, the exact same skills, but he doesn't have the same memories Jango Fett has. He doesn't have the memory of Mace Windu cutting his fucking head off with a lightsaber, right? So it's an interesting way of thinking about things, because what about AI? What if you make an AI that's even more intelligent than you? It doesn't have the same memories, but it has the same mannerisms. And maybe if you think the human race is about to go extinct, you might feel some more consolation on your deathbed, knowing that other sentient beings will pick up the flag of civilization and keep running with it. And there's people who are called meta-human immortalists. So unlike the post-human immortalists, they think that your memories don't really matter. What matters is the idea of sentience propagating throughout the universe. So even if humans die out, we could feel some consolation if like other kinds of beings, like animals, like maybe chimpanzees or AI or other kinds of sentient beings, carry on our legacy throughout the universe. And that's one way in which some people think we can overcome the information theory of death. Because it's not really a death.
That's their own coping mechanism, man.
Exactly,
it's like such a delusion.
Exactly. it's kind of cope, because it's saying, well, death isn't defined by the prevalence of beings with memories. It's defined by the prevalence of conscious beings. So these AI could be conscious beings. These animals, these chimps could be conscious beings. And even though we die out, conscious beings themselves will continue. Right. The idea of civilization is how they define life. And there's another theory. It's called the Boltzmann brain. So this is the way the metahuman immortalists think you can overcome the information theory of death. The Boltzmann brain is the idea that the universe, how long is the universe going to last? 10 to the power of 100 years. So that's a 1 with 100 zeros. That's a very long time. And in that time, statistical permutations of the way in which particles organize guarantee that whatever I am, I will exist again and again and again. Like, just by random chance, the molecules of the universe will come together to form me again sometime later in the future. This is called the Boltzmann brain.
Right.
So it's
that's the one you meditate on before you go to sleep to.
Exactly.
Yeah. You guys, you guys keep on talking. I'm just gonna get a drink. I'll be right back.
Sure thing. So there's another one called another theory called quantum immortality, and quantum immortality says that, you know the Schrodinger's cat experiment, right? So when we fire the particle of radium into the vial of poison, there's a chance that an electron is not in one place or another place, but it's in both places. So the cat is alive in one universe and dead in the other universe. So the cat can go on living in another universe despite dying in this universe. And this is where you get into all sorts of like Rick and Morty multiverse kind of shit. So is the Rick in this universe, Rick and Morty in this universe, are they the same as Rick and Morty's in other universes? Does identity transcend universes? So that's one way in which the information theory of death can be overcome. Another way it can be overcome is there's a YouTuber on if you search the word transhumanism, you'll get to everyone. I think you made a video on this.
What you guys talking about?
Did you make a YouTube video on Styx Hexenhammer?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Styx Hexenhammer, he's one of these metahuman.
He made a video about me too, and we went back and forth and did a little debate.
Yeah, so Styx Hexenhammer, he's a metahuman immortalist, and he believes you can overcome the information theory of death. He says, my consciousness has existed before, and it will exist again because the universe is infinite, and there are infinite multiverses, and in some way, some form, what I am right now will exist again, just by statistical anomaly. But Rowan says, I have a haxiety unique to my location in space and time, unique to this universe and not any other universes. So my haxiety will die, but the pattern of me maybe won't die, but that's not me. Styx Hexenhammer would disagree with Rowan and say, well, if I reincarnate into the same pattern I am now, I haven't really died. So that's how some people think. Metahuman immortalists think you can overcome the information theory of death. So that's where you lose a lot of people when you're talking about death. So let's talk about the sixth theory of death. So the sixth theory of death is material death. So all these AI people who think AI is going to go forth and carry the torch, and or other beings, other sentient beings who are like humans will go forth and carry the torch, or there's copies of me in other multiverses that will carry the torch of civilization, or my consciousness will exist again in the future. We have here's a huge black pill, and it's called the material theory of death. So we have information death and now material death. And what material death says is if we look at the laws of thermodynamics, the second law says entropy increases in a closed system. If you leave a closed system alone, it's going to just increase and increase and increase. And what that implies, some physicists are saying, is this is implying a heat death of the universe. And let's talk about the term heat death, because it's not really a heat death. There's still going to be heat. You can't reach absolute zero. There's a heat death. What I'm saying by a heat death is that all these particles, like photons, protons, electrons, atoms in general, the atoms that allow sentient beings to exist, the Big Rip theory says these atoms themselves will be pushed apart by the dark energy expansion of the universe. So the expansion of the universe is not only going to start pushing galaxies apart, it's not only going to start pushing planets apart, it's going to rip the fucking atoms into pieces everywhere in the universe. All atoms will be ripped into pieces. So Styx Hexenhammer and the metahuman immortalists are wrong about the fact that sentient beings can continue to exist, because atoms can't exist. No matter what universe you are, they say the second law of thermodynamics will rip apart all atoms. So they're essentially saying all things in all universes will eventually die.
I think Styx Hexenhammer thinks that, because when I was arguing with him, he was arguing against the idea that you can live forever. I don't even think he brought up this other idea that his consciousness would reassimilate in some other universe. I don't think he's into that much. I mean, maybe you saw a video that I didn't.
He talked about reincarnation in this universe. He said my consciousness will exist again just because statistical permutations in the universe, in an infinite universe, eventually, by random chance, another Styx hexenhammer will assemble 10 to the power of, say, 60 years in the future.
Okay, I think he did mention reincarnation. You're right.
Yeah. So here's one way you can take out even the metahuman immortalists can be wrong, because all atoms will disintegrate into photons, and photons are not material. Photons are energy. They're pure energy. They're pure particles of light that are described by waves rather than by particles. So they're more like they're not what you would consider like physically tangible. And you have but there's a way you can overcome this death too. And the people who believe this are called what's the word for them? They're people who are pantheists. So pantheists, they think that the dichotomy between matter and energy doesn't really matter, because as long as the same like substance of the universe is going on, you are not dead. You are not dead. Like the material, even if it disintegrates into photons, it's not dead. And this is a view in Eastern religions, especially like Hinduism. It's called non-duality. And non-duality says, actually, material shit and non-material shit, they're actually one. And Einstein has an equation called E equals mc squared. Do you guys know what E equals mc squared means?
I've heard of it 1,000 times, but I don't really, it never really sank in. What the heck does that even mean? I don't know.
So let me explain what E equals mc squared means. You could pull it up on Google Images, and I'll show you guys what it means.
E.
Yeah, so the people who believe matter and energy, it doesn't really matter if like matter gets turned into energy, because it's still the same shit. And what E equals mc squared says is that matter is equivalent to energy. So what is the E? The E stands for energy. So the photons, right? The photons that the matter disintegrates into are the photons, the energy. And the M stands for mass, which represents matter. And then the C represents the speed of light, which is it's just a number. So it's just a number you plug in. And then the squared is, of course, you square that number. So if you multiply the matter in the universe by the speed of light squared, you will get the energy. The same shit that makes up the matter has not been destroyed. It's just been transferred into energy. And these very like Eastern Hindu non-duality people, it's called Advaita Vedanta. That's their philosophy. They say that all things in the universe are one, regardless of whether they're photons, electrons, protons. All things are us. I am all things. All things are me. All things are made of photons. This is where we get into like fucking supersymmetry.
That sounds like Pocahontas too. Like she's talked about that stuff, right? That's what the Native Americans thought.
Yeah, the Native Americans, they believe in Watanka Taka, the Great Spirit. So it essentially means all things are the same thing. Every particle is inside everything. I am inside everything. In Sanskrit, there's a term called tatvamasi, and it means thou art that. It means you are everything else. I am the same as this coffee cup, and because the same particles, the same protons and electrons in this coffee are inside me. And if you break the universe down to just one particle, the photon, or let's get into like string theory, like supersymmetry. Supersymmetry says that all particles in the universe are just one particle vibrating at different frequencies. So the photon, the electron, everything, it's just one particle at different frequencies. So everything is made of the same unit, and it's only the way in which they organize that gives them their distinction. It's they organize into patterns that allow them to perceive patterns. So it's like a recursive perception where the matter can perceive itself, and that's all consciousness really is. So the pantheists, which is what we call them, believe that you can overcome the material theory of death, because as long as the universe goes on to exist, the I will go on to exist, because I am all particles in the universe, and all particles in the universe are the same as me. This one's very, very like New Agey, Alan Watts. What do you guys think of this theory, non-duality? Do you think this is finally something crazy about like finally a crazy take on death, a take on death that's truly crazy, truly meaningless?
Truly crazy.
It is very, very interesting.
Yeah, my mind doesn't. I don't know. I don't vibe with that stuff. I'm just like I'm simplistic in my thinking. I'm just like this materialist. Like, let's just like not have our brains die, because our brains are probably have our consciousness. You know.
Well, we kind of went on a big little rabbit hole there for our list here.
Yeah. So I'll just cover the seventh theory of death. So the seventh theory of death, just really quickly, is that not even the universe will exist. Even the universe will die. Even the particles themselves will be ripped apart into nothingness, where you get truly every particle becomes isolated into a void, and even that particle gets ripped apart, and you have true nothingness. And there's people called panentheists. So unlike the pantheists, the panentheists think that there are sentiences outside the universe that will go on to live, even though we don't. And this is where we get into like the simulation theory. So Rowan has a lot to say about like the simulation theory. What if we are just
simulation theory?
What if everything here is just a video game, and there's people outside the universe playing the video game? And just because the video game has been destroyed doesn't mean the people who were playing the video games in our avatars were destroyed.
Yes.
Into the idea of like souls and stuff.
And also, you could say like the same thing, like maybe the simulator. This is totally like crossing your fingers, wishful thinking, but like the simulator or whatever, they can like potentially have a backup copy of everyone's exact. Like maybe we don't exactly know how consciousness works, and maybe they have like a backup consciousness of everyone, and can just like turn someone off or reanimate them and just everything like that. It's crazy. That's all wishful thinking and hypothetical, but
it is very wishful thinking, and it's the seventh theory of death. And the people who believe this, panentheists, think that the simulation theory is true, and also like Christians, they think that the universe itself doesn't matter. All that matters is what's outside the universe, and God will just take everything that mattered in this universe and recreate it somewhere else. So this is where you get to like really speculative territory. Nothing you can measure, nothing you can make scientific conclusions of. It's just shit you can speculate on, and it's essentially that we are gamers playing a video game, and maybe we're the NPCs, and Jesus is the playable character, and Jesus is just interacting with the NPCs. And that's all this really is God is playing Jesus in a video game. God is the gamer, Jesus is the game character, and we are the fucking NPCs, and all this shit is meaningless. So yeah, let's recap what we got
and
here.
Just one thing that I want to add to that is like even the Mormon religion, if some people are familiar with the Mormon religion, they believe that we're all going to become gods. And that, I mean, if we're all going to become gods, and we all, like what we know as our God right now is it controls a bunch of people, and or not controls, but we're part of our God, Jesus Christ and everything. Imagine that we could already be in part of that simulation. So Jesus Christ and our God that we know could be just one of those people that lived a life just like us, and now has his own, NPCs in that particular example. So part of the example of the Mormon religion. So yeah, anyway, go on.
So you ever heard of the term, the universe is a strange loop? So what I mean by a strange loop is like a fractal. So the God creates people, each of those people become gods, and they create their own simulations, and they become a god, and then their simulations become simulators, and they create simulations, and it's just this fractal structure of the universe that you can only understand if you take like fucking psychedelics and shit. But yeah, just like that's essentially what this theory is implying, is that this universe doesn't matter. What's outside of the universe matters, and even like nothing ever dies because the simulators just create simulations, and the simulations create simulations, on and on ad infinitum. So it's all very absurd. So yeah, let's just recap. So we got the medical theory of death, which the longevists think you can overcome through resuscitation. You've got the structural theory of death, which the human immortalists think you can overcome by reassembly. You've got the functional theory of death, which the transhuman immortalists think you can overcome by reanimation. And you've got logical theory of death, which the posthuman immortalists think you can overcome through rebirth. Then you've got the information theory of death, which the metahuman immortalists think you can overcome through reincarnation. And then you've got the material theory of death, which the pantheists think you can overcome through just non-duality. And then lastly, you've got the thermal death or heat death, which the panentheists think you can overcome by just transcending reality itself. So those are 7 theories of death, and I think most people would fall into theory 3 or theory 4. The people who believe in like the 7th and 6th theories are often looked at with as crazy people. So yeah, this is just how you think about cryonics is going to be determined by what philosophical view you take about death. It's going to it's going to be dependent on what you think life is, what you think non-life is. Is life just like homeostasis? Is life just the structure of the body? Is life just the DNA molecule itself? Is life just information? Is it just patterns? Is life just matter? Is it just like material things? Is life maybe material and energy intertwined by E equals mc squared? Is life, quote unquote life, just the universe itself? Is it everything that exists outside the universe? It all depends on how you define life. And that's all we have to say about cryonics. So what's next on our list?
Yeah, and just to add something to think about too, that's not on our list, before we move on, and imagine also the fact that we know that Earth has a limited time, right? It's going eventually, the sun is expanding, and the sun is our sun, our star. We know supernova is going to blow up, and that's going to destroy Earth. What if there was humankind before Earth? What if there was another Earth before us that was even 1,000 years ahead of us in technology and everything else, that lived a full life of a planet and had their own star of a sun? And just imagine that. Or even what if, because we know, even and more in particular than that, we know our universe is infinite, right? So the odds is there's more than likely another Earth out there that has specifically another star that is of the sun that has life. They could be thousands and thousands of years ahead of us in the future, which they may already found or have the cure to aging.
Exactly. So if you accept that the universe is infinite, you are implying that there are millions and millions of copies of us having the same conversation we're having right now with the same consciousness. And the way me and Rowan distinguish between this theory of identity is called the haxiety. And the haxiety says, in order for two things to be identical, they must also occupy the same place at the same time in the same sort of metaphysical coordinates. And it's called the Leibniz's law. Is two things that share all their properties are the same thing, but we don't share all our properties in common because we have spatio-temporal properties, and that's called a haxiety. And it all goes back to these Christian philosophers who are trying to define the Trinity, and they're trying to define what makes a thing, what gives it individuality. And this is just one way that you can imply you have individuality. So what you just described is like a meta-human immortalist theory, whereby even if I die, there's another planet somewhere with Max on it, and Max will accomplish what I failed to accomplish. So,
right.
Yeah.
I used to be really excited about the alien salvation theory. I remember writing an article about that a long time ago on the Eternal Life Fan Club. Because, that was just so exciting to me. There could be aliens who might cure aging for only a select few of us that, maybe they're watching us.
And that's a good segment.
If they're watching you to see if you're a good enough person, and if you're a good enough person, they might want to cure your aging and save you.
You guys ever heard of Jay Posadas? He's a Trotskyist communist in Latin America who thought that aliens were watching Earth, and that the aliens would only save the humans who were smart enough to embrace communism. And he thought the only way we could achieve communism is by communicating with dolphins and aliens, and then the aliens, the space comrades, would bring communism about on Earth. And the way we get to that is we nuke every city on Earth to get rid of the capitalist system.
Oh my
and
gosh!
Communists who survive create communism. That's called post-sadism, and it's this crazy fucking UFO fucking sci-fi communism that you should really look into just because of how fucking crazy it is. But yeah. Maybe
so the next
putting that fucking ice pick into Trotsky's skull was a good thing.
So one of the things I think we should go on as our next part of the list is we do have government maybe particularly hiding. So this is another method. Government may already have cures to aging or have time machines or something that they're hiding from us. And good evidence of that would be, Area 51. Why is Area 51 so highly protected? It's more there's evidence that Area 51 is more protected than even the White House and certain things out. It's really crazy stuff. And then also there's evidence with evidence that there's cures to cancer, but yet the government wants to focus on something that big pharmas and everything else. So there's definitely that's another segue is Rowan. Go ahead and lead us on that conversation.
Yeah.
That's our next segue.
So we have listed here as under the category aging already cured theory, right? The idea that there's already a cure for aging.
Government, oh, yeah, like people in the kids.
Right. I've kind of said this. I've thrown this out there a few times that there could be secret societies of people that have already cured aging and that they're secretly monitoring us and deciding who among us is worthy to be embraced into their advanced society of like eternal youth and everything. And yeah, they might have advanced technologies. It's also one of these wishful thinking ideas. It's like everything that involves there's just a lot of wishful thinking ideas, right? There's even the hypothetical God that's wishful thinking. And there's the government that has the cure for aging, that it's already cured and everything. All these things are wishful thinking, but just because it's wishful thinking doesn't mean it's not true. That's another thing we should say, right?
And even another example is another thing that Ron and I were talking about. A lot of these mainstream movies, like Transcendence that we talked about earlier, the end of that movie, what was the concept? Another spoiler. End of that movie is basically essentially saying, hey, she rejected living forever. She rejected the transcendence. She, even after him healing her injury, she rejected it.
You notice there's a constant theme of like movies where the girl in the movie just makes some stupid decision about specifically eternal life. I could think of multiple instances. There's Winnie in Tuck Everlasting. She had the opportunity to freaking live forever. She rejected it. There's Wendy in Peter Pan. She had the opportunity to go to Neverland and freaking be young forever with Peter Pan, but she chose aging and death. And there's that example you just gave in the Transcendence. There's just all these examples. Oh, and then there's the age of Adeline. It's like they're trying to brainwash girls specifically to somehow embrace their aging and death. It's weird. Like Hollywood, it's this reoccurring theme.
The show 100, sixth season. That they the two that left the sleeping pods and wanted to just live out their life and die on the ship. Like, you know, we can go on and on and on. Like, a lot of these huge mainstream movies all have a common goal, and it's just rejecting the idea of living forever.
Yeah.
Wondering if there is a reason behind that, if if these governments and secret societies have something to say, or big pharmas have something to say regarding that are influencing our minds, because movies is one of the big things right now that influences us, is what we watch, and that's definitely something to dictate the public, because we're already seeing, you know, with the fake news and everything that's going on in politics and everything that's, you know, being brushed and pushed against us, you know, like same thing with the movies. They want to, you know, change our viewpoints on things, and there's a lot of evidence to it. You know, if you want to prove wrong, what could possibly be so highly protected of Area 51 that it's more protected than even places like the White House? What could possibly be in Area 51? And we already know it's not a nuclear warhead, because we know where nuclear sites are. So you can't say it's a nuclear site. That's already debunked. What could possibly be so highly protected, that's even more protected than the White House and our president, that it's mind-blowing? You know, tell me what can be so valuable that you have to go to those lengths to protect.
You guys think it's a time machine? Maybe it's a time machine.
Is something that I thought it could possibly be.
Anyway, we could time possible life extension technology. I talked about it on my channel, but we have to define what a time machine is. So Einstein, he had a buddy called Rosen, and they came up with this equation called that implies the existence of space-time. What's the word for it? Ripping the fabric of space-time, not ripping it, but maybe joining it together. Like, let's say, there's a piece of paper. Give me a sec.
Oh, you guys, we skipped over vampires. It's right under the other theory, that theory that aging has already been cured. Because for instance, if there is vampires, then that means that they have figured out how to cure aging, right? It's right under government secret societies. Vampires. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's vampires. I think that's more like biological life extension.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's revisit that idea of the heat death of the universe. So how would you overcome that? So Einstein and Rosen thought that you have the fabric of space-time, right? What if I what if I took, that's where we are in the fabric of space-time, this tiny dot, and we're close to the end of the universe. We're about to die. And we want to go back here. We want to go back to the beginning of the universe, right? We want to go from here to here. So what if we opened a fucking portal? What if we took this fabric of space-time,
wormhole,
found a way to go from the end to the beginning? So that's called a wormhole. So if you guys are wondering where the wormhole comes from, it was Einstein and his buddy Rosen who came up with this concept of a wormhole, where you use the fact that time is relative. You use the fact that time is a construct of the human perception to get at the base structure of reality and find a way to sort of reconceptualize yourself in another context of the fabric of space-time. And the way we think you could do this is, we only know this theoretically, we don't know any experimentation, but it is possible to create negative matter. You just need to create it in large enough quantities to open a kind of gate and then send particles through that gate. So whether you send like the data for a mind upload, or whether you open the hole large enough to send a person through or a spaceship through, the idea is that we can go from the end of the universe to when the universe is about to die, back to the beginning of the universe, and then start all over. Just keep doing this forever and ever and ever. And you have immortality in a universe with a finite expiration date. And this is very interesting, because are you really going back to the start of that universe? Or have you opened up a portal to a new universe and you're going to the beginning of that universe? So this is called the grandfather paradox. So you guys have seen Back to the Future, right?
Yeah.
When Marty goes back in time, he finds he almost fucks his mom, but then he figures out it's his mom and doesn't fuck his mom, and then he gets his dad.
Holy crap!
To,
I don't remember.
like, join up with
Why did I not remember that part at all? I like blocked that out of my brain.
Okay, yeah.
I didn't know he almost has sex with his mom. What the heck? Really?
Well, yeah, yeah. So he almost fucks his mom, but then he realizes, like,
Tommy Hilfiger.
upon learning that his mom is
I feel like I just entered a new Mandela effect. Like, this is not right. What?
Yeah, he doesn't really try to fuck his mom, but he realizes that his mom wants to fuck him, and he's like, oh shit, I gotta get my mom to be attracted to my dad. But she's just so attracted to him because he's got the fucking skateboard and he's got the fucking Van Halen music, and he's like really cool compared to these like lame ass people in the 50s. So his mom wants to fuck him. He's like, no, you gotta fuck my dad.
That was the key. He stuck up for Biff.
Yeah, exactly. So after he fucking punches Biff out, he takes his mom and he starts dancing. And then Marty's like, okay, great. My parents are going to meet. And then I have to make sure they fuck so that I'm born. But then like some other guy takes the girl away and starts dancing with her. And he sees his hand disappear. Like he's on stage playing Johnny B. Good and he sees his hand disappear. Like, oh shit, my mom's not going to fuck my dad. So that means I'm not going to exist. That's one interpretation. So that's like the Copenhagen interpretation of like quantum mechanics. But what if we take a multiverse approach, the Everett's interpretation of quantum mechanics? It does not fucking matter if Marty's mom fucks somebody else and he's never born, because he's entered a new past of a new universe. He's entered, if the multiverse exists, by going back in time, he's created a new universe, and he is matter being added to that universe. He is a corporeal being injected into that system. So it does not matter if his parents fuck, because that Marty is dead, but he's got a new Marty, where he's beginning a new existence in the 50s. So that's one way in which you could just keep teleporting to new universes and never die. So
well, that's kind of what they did in season 2 with Biff being an owner of a casino and being super rich because of the sports book, and a completely new life.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yet the old Biff was still alive as the old self that told the new Biff. So there are two separate beings, two separate lives, two separate universes going on simultaneously.
Yeah. So that's time travel, and that's the grandfather paradox, which I don't believe in. I don't believe that you are going back to the same timeline that you were in, because I don't accept the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. I like Everett's interpretation better, and I think that's just a new universe that you've traveled to, a new universe in which that Marty of that universe is never born, but you, an outsider, still get to live in that universe. So that's one way to conceptualize immortality, life extension. So yeah, what's next on our list?
Let's see, what is next on our list? Let's see. Did we skip a bunch? We never did.
Yeah, gene therapy is the next one on the list.
Yeah. There's a bunch. Gene therapy. So Liz Parrish. I don't know much to say about it other than, Liz Parrish, she did gene therapy on herself. There's this idea that we could take the genes of these biologically immortal animals and use them to our advantage. We can insert genes into our own genes and freaking cure aging that way. Sounds awesome.
Have you guys ever heard of Cynthia Kenyon? So she's a geneticist at Harvard, and she's done these experiments with worms called C. elegans, and she noticed that if you take a gene called DAF2 and you remove it, the worms live twice as long. And if you add another gene in called DAF16, they live twice as long. And they're like, oh shit, we have analogs for this in humans. The analog in humans is IGF-1. So if you start using gene therapy, which is basically gene therapies, for those of you who don't know in the comments, gene therapy is when you take a virus, you get rid of you take the DNA of the virus, you take that shit out. Let's say you take coronavirus, right? You take coronavirus, you take the fucking coronavirus genes out, and then you put the copy of DAF16 inside it. And then you deliver that gene to every cell. And the virus is going to make more copies of the virus. And eventually the virus delivers those viruses coming out of that cell. They turn the cell into a factory for producing more viruses. Then those viruses go to every single cell. So every single cell gets an extra copy of that gene. Every cell in my body is going to get an extra DAF16. So in that sense, could you take this effect of making the worms live twice as long and transpose that onto a more complex organism like humans? Maybe. I don't know. But it's an interesting thing to look into. And what Liz Parrish is doing is she's trying to get telomerase producing genes into her cells. So what telomerase is you have DNA, right? And the DNA has certain patterns, and there's proteins that come on the DNA called polymerases, and they make a pattern, and they make a chain of amino acids, and that becomes a protein. And one of these proteins is called telomerase. And what telomerase does is it extends the ends of DNA, so the DNA never gets worn down. So if you make more copies of this telomerase, your DNA is going to live longer. It's not going to get degraded by radiation and toxins and free radicals. If you have these telomerase proteins being made, if you have more of them being made, they'll keep regenerating the DNA so that it never dies. And that's very interesting what BioViva, I believe her company's name, BioViva, is trying to do. So that's one very interesting avenue. It's just that the technology is so complex and we don't really understand it. Because what if you take the virus, you make your gene therapy virus, it starts coming towards the DNA, and it inserts the gene inside another really important gene. So what's an important gene we have? SIRT1. So SIRT1, it's important for regenerating the body. What if this new copy inserts inside SIRT1, and now you can't make the protein for SIRT1 anymore? You lose one copy of the gene because you inserted the pattern into the middle of the fucking gene, and now you ruin the pattern. And you do that for every cell in your body. Could you create death instead of curing it? It's very interesting, but we have to find a way to perfect the technology. And there's some interesting advances in CRISPR where we add a pattern into the CRISPR that makes it recognize the right spot to insert. So the technology is not good enough yet, in my opinion, but I think it could become good enough that we could get these genes in our body and live longer lives because of it.
Yeah. And by the way, whoever that doesn't know what CRISPR is, it's a gene editing program.
Yeah, so it's a gene editing.
Very new technology right now, so they're still in the developing of it.
So what CRISPR is it's a nuclease, and a nuclease is kind of like scissors that cuts the DNA, and it's attached to a guide RNA, and the guide RNA finds the right pattern and takes the scissors to the right pattern so that it inserts into the right spot every time. Wouldn't that be great? That it doesn't insert into the middle of the fucking gene and cuts every time. That's proteases, nucleases cut in the right spot. This is like a protein that knows how to take apart the DNA and insert the copy attached to the guide RNA in that spot. And I think that's very interesting. If we could just perfect the accuracy so you don't give fucking cancer to the people you're trying to cure. Yep. Any thoughts?
It's good stuff.
Yeah, I'm a fan of gene therapy.
And I actually just thought of this too. Is one of the things that are on our list that is specifically about cryonics to just kind of keep this organized. An alternative. We should go over alternatives to cryonics. One in particular, Rowan brought up, which he likes more than cryonics, is advanced life support. So do you want to take the lead on that, Rowan? Advanced life support?
Yes. So advanced life support. So I've always thought, okay, I don't like this idea that cryonics could freeze my brain cells and damage them so much that they might be irreparable. So I'm a bit of a skeptic when it comes to cryonics. So I thought, we already have this thing called life support. You can keep people on life support for a very long time. And that technology is only going to improve in the future. So why not just, instead of freezing our bodies, why not just hook ourselves up to extremely advanced life support in the worst case scenario that you were to die? Like, let's keep your heart pumping. Let's just keep the blood pumping through your freaking arteries. There are a few drawbacks to this. Alex mentions it's very, very, very expensive.
Yes, here's one counter argument is it's not necessarily the science, it's the economics that's the problem, because we already do have advanced life support, and just so happens to be the bane of our economy. Like 1/4 of our economy goes to Medicare, and most of that Medicare, I'd say like 90% of it, is spent keeping boomers alive on life support. And by life support, I mean anything from like drugs to like treatments that might give you like an extra few weeks of life, but not a few years of life. Essentially just the upkeep for a person who's already dying. And a lot of the younger people are like, hey, this is stealing from us because we're paying the fucking Social Security and like Medicare from our taxes. Like 1/3 of my income is going to this advanced life support, and it's just too expensive, and we should just let these old people die. And that's the main counter argument against advanced life support, is because when you do advanced life support, the costs are the magnitude of these costs is fucking phenomenal. You got to pay the man hours for the employees. You got to pay the nurses. You got to pay the doctors. You got to pay for all the
rent space of the room.
Fucking tube you got to pay for the compounds that's feeding them through the tube. You got to pay for the electricity used to keep all these fancy machines running. You got to pay for the space in a hospital. If you've ever had a hospital bill, the fucking hospital bed just for like 2 days is $9,000. It's insane, the fucking cost required to keep someone on advanced life support.
So basically you have to be like a freaking millionaire to do this right now.
Yeah, that's just for a few days. So imagine doing that for a few decades. So the cryonicists say cryonics is way cheaper because all you need is some LN2, liquid nitrogen, and keep it in like an underground storage space where you can keep like thousands and thousands of these tanks full of liquid nitrogen. And all it costs is like a bunch of fucking solar panels in the desert feeding in electricity underground.
And another potential problem to advanced life support is, usually the people that are on life support are brain dead, right? And so when you're brain dead, isn't your brain decaying at that point? So it really, even if you are extended, your brain is decaying, and who you are as a person is pretty much being decayed away and gone. Your memories, as we talked about earlier, is gone. Your information gone. So that's another reason why I don't feel like that's as good of a alternative to cryonics. So Alex has another interesting alternative. Alex, do you want to go over that one?
Yeah, so I'll talk about aldehyde stabilized cryopreservation in a second. But first we got to bring like politics into this. So there's a lot of like divided opinions on advanced life support. So some of the people who are saying, like the Bernie people, like social democrats or democratic socialists, whatever you want to call that ideology, is essentially saying that healthcare is a human right and you can't take the advanced life support away from these really old people. But then like the libertarian side, so like the libertarian capitalist people are like, we're not going to be able to afford this. Like life expectancy is increasing and increasing and increasing, and eventually the like fucking 90% of people's incomes are just going to go to keeping these boomers on life support. So some of them say instead of universal healthcare, we should have universal cryonics, where if you're taking up too much money on your fucking deathbed, we cease your Medicare, we cease your Social Security, and we give you free cryonics. So they're trying to like cut the fucking medical budget in it like by 9/10. Like they're trying to like save all this fucking money, and like for 1/100th of the cost, we just have universal cryonics instead of universal healthcare. And I know a lot of young people are after universal healthcare, but here's the thing: young people fucking rarely ever get sick. The vast majority, like the vast 90-something% of people who get sick are in their 70s or their 80s. And you could eliminate all those fucking costs if you just have universal cryonics, and you have the person who turns 65 and they're dying on their deathbed. or in their 70s and 80s, you have them like consent to being unplugged and put into an underground cryonic storage facility where one day the people in the future will reanimate them. And instead of spending the money on Social Security and Medicare, you spend that on you put that into a hedge fund so that when these people wake up, they have money to live, be integrated into society, and they can pay for their resuscitation and stuff like that. Alcor calls that the patient care trust. But yeah, some people don't believe that cryonics works, and they're like, nope, I want the life support. I don't want this universal basic cryonics shit. I don't want to be unplugged from my life support. I'd rather have like 1 extra week of life than be put in an underground freezer. So I'd rather spend my money on the extra week of life on my hospital bed. But there's another alternative to vitrification, and it's called aldehyde stabilized cryopreservation. So you take aldehydes, which are like, the formaldehyde, which we use to preserve dead bodies and stuff like that. Well, you inject that into the brain, and instead of the vitrification, which is it's kind of like a glass, it keeps every cell in place so that you don't lose the information in the brain. What aldehyde stabilized cryopreservation does is, okay, instead of a glass, we're going to turn it into a rubber, like kind of a rubber. And what that does is, like, when you use vitrification and you have like the cells turned into a glass, it keeps the synapses, which are like the gaps in your brain, like you have one neuron here, one neuron here. It keeps the cells frozen. But when you thaw them out, the cells are going to thaw out at different rates. So you're going to lose that fucking synapse. You're going to lose the information. All these cells are going to, the connections are going to scatter. You're not going to have the same brain you had before it was frozen. What aldehyde stabilized cryopreservation does is it creates like a chain of carbons that keeps the fucking synapse fixed. So even when you're thawing it out, the cells will kind of like the synapse will be preserved while it's being thawed out, and you'll have the same brain when you wake up. So that's why aldehyde stabilized cryopreservation is better than vitrification, which is just the glass, where you might not get the synapse when you're thawed out. And another thing you could do is it's like a nanotechnology, but I'm not talking about nanobots, because nanobots getting that into the bloodstream, and because here's the thing, like a frozen body, how are the nanobots supposed to navigate these fucking ice crystal like crystallized fucking environments? It's going to take like so much energy for a nanobot to do that. Instead, why don't you just take like a guide protein that'll guide a metallic particle into a cell? So you attach a protein to like a metallic particle, and the protein matches up with the cell, takes the metal inside, the particle inside. And then you do this to every cell. Like, you know how we talked about gene therapy? Put this metal particle inside every cell, and then you freeze the person. So they have every cell. So you got the frozen cryonics patient, and they have this particle inside every cell in their body. And then when you thaw them out, you don't just put them in a fucking microwave. Because you remember how, like, if you guys have used a microwave, tried to make a TV dinner, you'll realize, like, oh shit, this side is really cold and this side's really warm. And that's essentially the problem with cryonics, is when you thaw something out, it's not thawed out evenly, just as a microwave. But when you thaw out these people, instead of a microwave, you have a giant magnet, like an MRI or something like that. The magnet spins around, and these little particles inside every one of your cells are going to get hotter and hotter. Like, they're going to spin and create a tiny, tiny bit of heat inside the cell. So every cell in your body is getting the same amount of heat and being thawed out at the exact same rate. So this kind of microwave is essentially giving you an evenly heated TV dinner so that nothing breaks.
And I think that's a slow heat too, because you don't want to heat them. You don't want to heat up so fast, because that would just immediately destroy the cells.
Plus, what about the toxicity of that metal? Right?
Exactly. So let's talk about toxicity. Is some metals like silver and gold and are not as toxic as other metals. Even like graphene is very biocompatible. So you gotta find the right biocompatibility for the metal. But here's what is very toxic. Vitrification, it uses cryoprotectants like DMSO. DMSO stands for dimethyl sulfoxide.
I drink that.
Yeah, and what that is the
it can't be that bad if I freaking drink it.
Yeah, you can drink it, but here's the problem comes when you put that into every cell in your body. It's really hard to remove, because you have an intestinal system, right? You have a filtration system. You have a liver that detoxifies. You have kidneys that you can get rid of it technically if your filtration systems are good enough. But if you're putting it into your fucking brain cells and your fucking heart cells and your fucking like every cell in your body, it's really hard for your fucking kidneys to just get rid of it. But if you find a way to put these fucking like metallic things inside, eventually, as long as they're not doing anything, they can just hang out there as long as they're not harming you in any way. And what you want to do is even the aldehyde stabilized cryopreservation. Formaldehyde is very toxic, and the only way the cryonicists the only solution they have for stopping this is to say like, oh, we'll send nanobots in. Nanobots will fucking clean this shit up. Well, that sounds like very very hypothetical. What if the nanobots can't do it? What if you have to find a way?
Nanobots are like angels for transhumanists. It's like
Yeah,
transhumanist
exactly.
angels.
Well, I'd say
the angels will take care of it. The nanobots will take care of it.
You guys ever heard of the Philosopher's Stone in alchemy? I'd say transhumanism is like a modern version of alchemy. It's kind of like you have the Philosopher's Stone, and that'll turn all lead into gold. And it's kind of like nanobots in transhumanism. The nanobots will turn all useless things into useful things. So it's like nanobots are the Philosopher's Stone. And there's also like the elixir of life, and that's like a concoction you drink to make you immortal. Yeah. And in transhumanism, that's like biotechnology. So basically, biotechnology and nanotechnology are just like recontextualized alchemy concepts, the elixir of life and the philosopher's stone. So it's very interesting how
it's really scary, actually, like how long people have been talking about living forever, and in so many different contexts and like every different religion, and just like it's just humankind has always been obsessed with this idea of living forever, and it's like it looks all their efforts are so unfruitful. So sad.
What's great is that alchemy was very, very unscientific. It was basically like mysticism. It was all mysticism and no science at all. But now you actually have scientific ways of doing alchemy. So, turning lead into gold, we have what's called a super collider, and you take lead atoms and you smash them together, and you're going to get gold atoms. So technically the alchemists were right, but you just got to find the science to make it correct instead of just the mysticism.
And I said their efforts are unfruitful, but that's just the way it looks like on the surface. For all we know, some of them did figure out how to live forever, and they took the right potion or whatever, and they're freaking living forever right now in one of these secret societies or whatever, like we talked about. So.
You guys ever seen the movie The Man from Earth? So The Man from Earth is a movie about that exact same concept, where one guy has like a mutation in his cells, and it lets him live forever. So it's a caveman who has lived 10,000 years, and he's like a genius professor in the modern day. And the movie is about it all takes place in one room where the professor is arguing with a bunch of other professors, and he's like, let's entertain the concept that a human can live forever, and how would this work? And they start discussing it, and then he says, well, what if I am that human? What if I have that mutation and I've lived forever? And they're like, okay, well, yeah, prove it. And he starts talking about history, and he talks about events in history that no one else could have known about, but somehow make sense. And they start these other professors start panicking, like, holy shit, you actually are an immortal person. And he gets into like a fight with the religious professor in the room, and the religious professor is like, well, what about Jesus? And he says, I'm Jesus. I'm also the Buddha. I'm the Buddha who traveled to Jerusalem and became Jesus. And it's super like philosophical and like entertaining to the mind, but there's no explosions, there's no action sequences, there's no CGI. It's just a bunch of really good actors in one room, and that's why I like it. It had a budget of like $10,000, and with that on like the set, and with that they created a decent movie. So watch it, Man from Earth.
Ooh,
anyway,
okay.
Next thing on the list.
All right, next thing on the list, 2045 Avatar approach. So Dmitry Itzkov's approach.
Yeah. So, Rowan, you want to?
Yeah. So what I heard about this is I saw a video. I should Google that video, but it's basically they want to put their consciousness into a robot, like an avatar, like a robotic machine-like thing, like a better enhanced human body that's robotic. And I guess it's like mind uploading, right? Because they think they can transfer the consciousness to this robotic avatar. So, to me, it's wishful thinking, but I could see why people are into this if they thought it was possible to transfer consciousness into a robot.
So this is the approach that people think that the human body is uncurable. So they think that our current biology, our current cells of our body and blood and everything will age no matter what, and there's no answer to it. So the answer to that, obviously you got the mind uploading, you got all those things. There's also the avatar approach, which is having an artificial body, so like a robotic body or avatar, like the movie Avatar, and putting our mind and putting our consciousness in to that avatar and to this other perfected being or body that cannot age. So that's the approach. And the best movie that we can come up with, obviously, guys, the movie Avatar is or Transcendence, as we talked about earlier. Transcendence is another great example of this avatar system. So it is definitely a very interesting approach, and it's. What are your thoughts on it, Alex?
So I've read a book about this. It's called A Taxonomy and Metaphysics of Mind Uploading. And it's written by a computer scientist named Keith Wiley. And he talks about how the fuck would you make this avatar? And in the book, he says, well, I got 3 ways. There's 3 ways you can do this. The first is what Wiley calls destructive uploading. And what he means by that is we wait till you're dead, we take your brain, and then we cut it up using a atomic force layer Atlam microscope, and it cuts your brain up into what it's called cryo ultramicrotomes. And it's basically you freeze the brain and you use a laser to cut 50 nanometer thick pieces of your brain, slices. And then each of those slices, it's like...
It reminds me of that scene in Resident Evil when they're walking down that corridor, exactly. And the laser just like slices them in half.
So that's what Wiley's saying that scientists now have the technology to do to your brain. And then they take each of these frozen slices, and they're only 50 nanometers thick, so they're very thin. A microscope can see every neuron in there. And basically, they scan that into a computer, and then you create a computer model of exactly what your brain was. And then you find a way to run that brain. You stimulate the sort of functional processes, like through back propagation and neural networks and stuff like that. So you create an AI that simulates your brain, and that's basically you. He said that's the first way. And Rowan would have some problems with this because he doesn't like people freezing his brain and cutting it up and creating something that's like him.
Yes.
Maybe the AI will think he's Rowan. Maybe it'll think he's Rowan, but it's not actually Rowan. And that's what Rowan thinks is the problem. So the second method that Wiley talks about is non-replacement uploading. So let's say instead of cutting up Rowan's brain, we put Rowan into an MRI. Not an MRI we have today, but perhaps a more futuristic MRI that can get more details about your brain. It can maybe we'll put like metallic particles into your brain cells, and those will spin around and give you a better resolution of what's inside your brain. And then we take that pattern of the brain, and instead of killing Rowan, we keep Rowan alive, and we create a second Rowan, a digital Rowan. So there's now a physical Rowan and a digital Rowan. And then the physical Rowan can talk to the digital Rowan. He's like, Rowan, are you there? Digital Rowan says, yes, I'm there. And then Rowan asks Rowan a question that only Rowan would know. Rowan, what would you ask this Rowan? Maybe you'd ask him, what was my favorite food when I was 12 years old? And it answers the question, and it's like, holy shit, you are me. But is it? Is it really you? Or is it just a symbol manipulator? Is it just convincing you that it's you?
Exactly.
It's very interesting.
It is very interesting.
That's the second method. Wiley talks about a third method called replacement uploading, and he talks about something called the Moravec machine. So the Moravec machine is when you take this surgical tool, you cut your skull open, and you put the surgical tool in, and it sends these like nanobots, and the nanobots attach to your nerve cells, and they mold themselves into the shape of the neuron. So they replicate all the dendrites, all the axons. They replicate the exact same position, and then they kill the neuron and let it die and be disposed of by the body. And then they create another. Then the surgical tool sends another nanobot down and attaches to the previous nanobot, and then it does the next layer of neurons, and then the next layer, and then the next layer, and eventually you put the skull back on top, and then you're walking around your daily life, and slowly but surely, over the course of 10 years, you're feeling your brain slowly become replaced by silicon neurons, replacing the carbon neurons. And your consciousness, you still feel like you. And that at the end of the 10 years, you open up the brain again, and it's all metal. It's all metal cells doing the computations. I think that's very interesting. Of course, you could also use physical neurons. So here's an idea I came up with, and that's stem cells. So instead of using like silicon neurons, you do what's called induced pluripotent transduction. So it's when you take a skin cell. Let's say I take a skin cell from Rowan's hand, I put that into a petri dish, and then I apply 4 factors called Yamanaka factors. So there's a scientist, Shinya Yamanaka, Japanese guy in 2005, who discovered that if I add these 4 compounds into the cell, it's going to fuck with its genes and turn it back into a stem cell. So now I got Rowan stem cells, and I can make them replicate infinity without aging, because stem cells don't age. Stem cells are immortal cells. and I make an infinite amount of Rowan neurons, and then I put them on the surgical tool, and I put it in Rowan's head. And let's say Rowan has Alzheimer's, and his neurons are degrading. They're old, aged neurons. Instead of metal neurons, I put physical neurons in Rowan's brain. And whenever a cell dies, it fails, there's always another neuron to take its place. It's very complicated how you can make that work. How this like clump of neurons at the top of Rowan's brain is like running around replacing his dead cells. Rowan would definitely.
Here's another problem I figured out with robotic neurons and a brain that's in any other interface, any other substrate than a brain material substrate, like a robotic substrate, is because then you're susceptible to like EMP devices and like different devices that could just shut off anything electricity, or just like you're vulnerable to a whole new set of weapons, right? I mentioned hacking, but then there's also this weapons that might be specifically able to, or even like powerful magnets could just like mess up. Like we have like computer chips, right? And if you put a powerful magnet next to the computer chip, it wipes out the memory, destroys all the. So then, like, holy crap, someone could just come by with these powerful magnets and just like erase your memory and just kill you. It's like, holy crap.
So, Rowan, you ever heard of solar flares?
Yes.
Let me tell you about solar flares. So a solar flare is when the sun, it's called a coronal mass injection, coronal mass injection, CME, mass ejection. So it ejects a bunch of particles, like ions, like hydrogens without their electron, or electrons without their proton. So it injects all these it shoots out all these particles into space. And sometimes the Earth is in the wrong place at the wrong fucking time. And that beam of ionizing energy hits the Earth. And when it does hit the Earth, it gets the Earth has a magnetic field, right? And it's like, imagine you can Google a Google image picture of the Earth's magnetic field. So like the Earth, when it rotates, when the core Earth has a metal core, and when it rotates, the core creates a magnetic effect, right? Because when you rotate metal, you get magnets, you get magnetic forces, and essentially all that shit is going to get funneled into the North and South Pole. And when that happens, you get the Northern Lights and the Southern Lights, the Aurora Borealis and the Aurora Antarctica Australis, the Aurora Australis, which is the southern Northern Lights. And you get these, what you see in the sky is the fucking particles from the sun ionizing other particles, and it makes a very pretty light. But sometimes when the sun, every 10 years or so, the Earth, the sun gets into a cycle. About like every 11 years, there's a cycle where the sun injects a fuck ton of these things, and some of them are really big, and they hit the Earth. And when the magnetic field takes it in, it's not able to direct it toward the North and South Pole. So everywhere on Earth is going to get that fucking shit hitting the ground. And what this does is it wipes out fucking computers. The ionizing energy gets into the fucking Earth's crust, and it fucking fucks up your like your electronic devices. And this has actually happened to us 150 years ago. In 1856, there was an event called the Carrington event. And the Carrington event is when we got hit by a solar flare so fucking big that you could see the Northern Lights in Cuba, not in fucking Alaska, not in Australia, in Cuba, in this everywhere was fucking getting this ionizing energy, and it knocked out all telegraph lines on Earth. So back then, we didn't have very advanced technology. We didn't have computers. We didn't have power grids. We had a bunch of like maybe electric lights in Europe and America. We had telegraph lines. All that shit got knocked out, and we had to rebuild it. Luckily, there wasn't that much to rebuild. So they're like, okay, whatever. It's a thorn in our side, but we'll rebuild it. If it happened today, however, how do you rebuild every computer on Earth? How do you rebuild every power grid on Earth? If that happened to us, we would descend into fucking post-apocalyptic Mad Max-style social collapse. Not to mention, any mind uploads we create would be wiped the fuck out.
See, that is so freaking why I don't want to do mind uploading.
Without electricity. People nowadays pretty much rely on electricity to live. So I feel like it would be a society where people wouldn't even know how to live without technology.
So here's the thing. There's solutions to this, and it's called a Faraday cage. So a Faraday cage, You ever seen these experiments from the 1800s where a scientist stands in front of a cage where they can see him, and they shoot themselves with like this giant burst of electricity, and the audience gasps like, oh no, the scientist is going to get hit by the electricity. But no, the scientist is fine, and it's absorbed by the cage. It protects him from the electromagnetic effects of the beam he shot at himself. So what we could do is, and we know it works, is we can build Faraday cages for the power grid, so that when we do get hit by a solar flare, there's no leak of the energy into the system, and you completely keep it isolated, so that you don't have to. It doesn't fry the fucking circuitry, and you can rebuild from that. So there's ways you can store blind flows around such that they don't get hurt by the solar flare. It's just that our government is so fucking incompetent. They don't bother doing this shit. They don't bother backing up the data centers. They don't bother backing up.
One thing that you can give a positive to the government about solar flares and anything regarding space is Trump just implemented what's called the Space Force. And that's a new thing. So we're getting involved right now within space and the consequences of space, such as solar flares, asteroids, meteorites.
Yeah, so here's a hot political take from me, is I don't think we should be fucking around with space until we backed up all electrical grids, all data centers, until we backed up fucking YouTube, we backed up Google, we backed up Wikipedia, we backed up all this shit underground in Faraday cages where it's fucking safe. And even if all computers on Earth get fried, we have something to rebuild civilization from. But the government doesn't give a shit. It costs so little to do this. Like, Faraday cages aren't that expensive. You could back up the power grid right now with just like a fraction of NASA's budget. But they don't give a shit. They're like, oh, we got to get to Mars. Got to get to Mars, this fucking barren wasteland where humans can't live. And, oh, don't worry, we'll terraform it. And it's not like we can't terraform the Earth, but somehow we can terraform Mars. I just don't buy it. I think if I was in charge of the fucking space funding, I would redirect it towards existential risk, alleviating existential risk, so that civilization doesn't turn into Mad Max. But whatever, the people in charge don't know what the fuck they're doing. So whatever, I guess, build your bunkers and store Wikipedia in like these fucking Faraday cages, so that when you rebuild, you can be king of the new empire.
Store all your YouTube videos too. My gosh, it suck to lose all those. Great.
Yeah, and just to bring it back to what we talked about with 2045 is just the key thing that I feel with 2045 is one of the key problems that we see in majority of these things on our list, such as is funding for finding a cure, because as we talked about earlier, there's not a lot of funding when it comes to life extension. Aubrey de Grey, the first thing that we talked about, the 7 reasons, what he came out and said the biggest problem that we have is funding. So that's common with everything. And one thing that's really that I love about the 2045 initiative is this is a huge whale that is leading this 2045 initiative. Dmitry Itskov. He is a billionaire. He's a Russian billionaire. And this could be the best of our list in terms of feasible, just because it is the most funded project out of everything on our list. So if it's just about funding, this is the most funded of everything, just because it is backed by a Russian billionaire.
Wow.
And found. So there's no other thing on our list that has more funding than this. So
he should put more money into. I mean, he's putting so much money into this 2045 project, but is he putting money into anti-aging? Is he?
Well, his because his thought process is the avatar is the best way. So he's fully focused on that, and I don't know if he is
very disappointing
going on other sides of it, but. If you could pull that image up, Rowan, that I just sent in the chat.
Okay.
The last thing that I want to speak on for the 2045 initiative is one thing that I love about what Dmitry Itskov doing is with his approach is he's giving us a timetable. He's giving us a realistic goal so that we can see where we're at and times at where we're at. So can you pull that image up real quick, Rowan?
From now on, send me links and images in the group chat, because it sucks to have to open that up. Everyone sees the chat. It sucks.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So Let's have him pull this
Yeah,
image
let me
up
pull that
for
up.
everybody.
All right. Got it
Yeah.
here.
Okay, so basically, guys, with this, as we can see,
Do you see it?
2015. So everybody can read that. Oh, that's in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, that's not a good... Can you find one that's not in Spanish?
Let's see. How do I do this? It's the same chart. Okay.
Okay. So here, I found one. Yeah, just put that on screen that's not in Spanish. Sorry, I didn't... I don't know why I sent
Miles.
you one.
Is it I'm getting a bunch of ones that's not... They're so small. This is a weird image search here. This is not the normal Google image search for me. What is this?
Just type in Avatar Project Milestones.
Avatar Project.
There you go. That one with the face of Dmitry Itskov on your screen.
I don't see... Oh, this one. Oh, there.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
So this kind of gives us a really... And this is what I love about his approach, is it's really detailed with the time frame. All right. So 2015, we found a copy of an avatar, first copy of an avatar. 2017, launching the avatar into mass production. 2020, so right now, widespread production of avatar, affordable and mass like a car. We can go all the way to 2025, first commercial of a body B. 2030, so all the way to 2045 is the mind transfer and a hologram. And it's, we got Avatar A, Avatar B, Avatar C, Avatar D. So it's very detailed out, very thorough. We have a timetable on when everything is going. He's going step by step by step. So it's really, really good to have a timetable project milestone approach that we can all see and feasibly see that we can all take advantage of this in our lifetime. So any final thoughts for you guys on the 2045 initiative?
Yeah, I think so. We've talked about the three ways we're going to create this avatar. So Keith Wiley's non-destructive uploading, destructive uploading, and replacement uploading. Thing is, I don't like any of these methods. They seem kind of very precarious in the sense that you can't get people to accept them. So I think we need different ways, and I've come up with a few. What's that meme with Norman Osborn in Spider-Man? And he's like, I'm something of a neuroscientist myself, and I'm something of a neuroscientist myself, as in I took one fucking neuroscience class in my college, and I'm not even done my fucking undergraduate degree yet. But anyway, upon taking this neuroscience class, I have a few ideas I came up with, or maybe other ways to do this 2045 initiative. So you guys want to hear some of those?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Instead of destructive uploading, non-destructive uploading, and replacement uploading, there's what I like to call mind doubling, mind coupling, mind reconstruction, and mind duplication. So which one of those you guys want to hear first?
Any of them.
Okay, sure. We'll start with mind doubling. So this one's kind of fucked up because it requires you to create a clone of yourself. So there's this process we have, a surgical process called the hemispherectomy, where if your baby is dying, you cut the baby's brain in half, and the part that is the part of the brain that has the disease or the cancer or whatever is taken out, and then the person grows up and it's just a perfectly normal person with one half of their brain. So we know you don't need your entire brain to be you, so to speak. So what if you create a clone of yourself, right? And let's say you're dying of fucking whatever. You're dying of whatever, and you have this clone of yourself created, and it's a kid, and you gotta fucking kill the kid, and then surgically extract his brain, and then put one half of the brain in your brain and take one half of your brain out. And essentially, you're gonna feel really fucking weird at first, but eventually the brain is gonna create neuroplasticity. One half of the kid's brain is gonna create neuroplasticity with the adult brain. It's going to start intertwining, and then you're going to get a new sense of identity. And then while you're dying, you're aging, later on, maybe 10 years later on, we take that out and we keep the part of your brain that remains, which has slowly become accustomed to mimicking the other half of your brain. So essentially, you live with half a brain, and you keep adding halves of your brain into your mind. And essentially, I call this mind doubling. It's kind of weird, and it's very, very complicated. But what it doesn't require is any advanced technology. All you got to do is keep fucking having brain surgery and putting half your fucking clone's brain into your brain. Another thing you could do is instead of killing the kid, your clone kid, your little Boba Fett, and you as the Jango Fett, you have both Jango Fett and Boba Fett go into the fucking hospital, and then they have brain surgery to switch one half of their brain. So now the little kid has let's say what you're dying of is not a brain disease, but a body disease. So you go to the hospital and you switch out your brain with the kid. So now half of you is inside, half of Jango Fett is inside Boba Fett, and half of Boba Fett is inside Jango Fett. So even if Jango Fett dies of like his liver cancer or whatever, Boba Fett has half of Jango Fett's brain, and then he grows up, and then he makes a clone of himself, and then they both go to the hospital, they switch one half of the brain, and they just keep going on and on. So that's what I call mind doubling, and it's something we do actually.
I have heard you can actually live with just half a brain. I saw a video on YouTube. It was this little kid just had half a brain just living.
So yeah, I came up with that all on my own. So if any of you watching want to take credit for that and like copy it and use it in like a sci-fi story or whatever, you're free to do so. I don't give a shit about intellectual property or whatever. I just want to live forever. That's all I care about. So please, any actual neuroscientists who are listening to me right now, find a way to get this shit done. And preferably without killing the clone kid. Preferably just switch brains with each other. Because it only takes, like you, Rowan, if I took half your brain out, you're still Rowan. Your brain hemispheres are identical. It's just that there's a couple of differences, like artistic versus logical and shit like that. But you are still, it's still a mirror of your other half of your brain. The structure is the same. It'll keep your biological functions alive.
But,
so yeah, let's call
what
it.
What about the core part of your brain? I know there's the brain, but then there's the core part. I don't know if that can be split in half.
So here's what's called the brainstem. The brainstem. So the brainstem, what you could do is you could sort of like put the clone's brain. You're gonna have to kill the clone and take his brainstem, but that's where it gets complicated. But I think you can still split the brainstem in half, because the way in which your brainstems communicate is you have this bridge called the corpus callosum. And we know that you can live without the corpus callosum because in epilepsy patients, we have a special surgery where we open their skull, a surgeon goes in and cuts the corpus callosum, and the person doesn't act any different, except that when like there's a couple tests you can do where you put their arm on a desk and they ask you to draw something, and you're like, well, I can't draw anything, and then the right arm draws something. And then they're like, hey, you just drew something. And they're like, no, I didn't. So it's kind of very weird, but it doesn't destroy your identity, cutting the corpus callosum. So that's why I think maybe mind doubling could work. So you guys want to hear about mind coupling?
Yeah.
Yes.
So mind coupling is another idea I came up with, and it's based on Elon Musk's Neuralink technology. So let's say I have Rowan, right? I'm going to create a BCI, a Neuralink for Rowan, and I'm going to attach it to Rowan. And I'm going to take the other half and find a deafist, like a euthanasia patient, who's very fucking depressed. Let's say I don't know, Bobby. Let's say Bobby doesn't give a shit about life anymore, and Bobby says, "Yeah, I don't really want to be a life extensionist anymore. Just kill me, like voluntary suicide." So we put the BCI in Bobby's brain too. So Bobby has consented to terminate his life, and in exchange, I don't know, we give him a bunch of money for letting us put the Neuralink in his brain. So while Rowan is living, we put Bobby into an induced coma, and basically Bobby is unconscious, but his brain is still alive. He's still on life support. And then Rowan goes about living his life, and the Neuralink inside Rowan's brain is transferring all the neuroplastic activity that's happening in his brain to Bobby's brain. Bobby's brain is getting the exact same stimulus that Rowan gets in his daily life. So if I give Rowan a high five, Bobby will learn how to do that high five. Bobby's brain will learn how to do that. It will be stimulated based on Rowan's Neuralink. So eventually, Rowan's going to get older one day. He's going to become 50, 60, but Bobby's brain has been learning. While it's in a coma, it's been learning everything about Rowan that there is to know. So basically, Bobby's brain becomes a copy of Rowan's brain. It gives the same output for the same input. And you can this gets into like identity and shit, but Rowan's not going to have Rowan's body. Rowan's going to have Bobby's body. And when Rowan dies, we take Bobby out of the fucking coma or whatever, or you talked about like life support preservation. If Rowan ever gets a disease like Alzheimer's or something, we cut the Neuralink, let Rowan die, and then wake up Bobby, and Bobby thinks he's Rowan. So that's very, very, very interesting. It's a little more advanced technologically.
Wow, that's a movie plot right there. That's crazy.
In the last I described. But somebody make a movie about this. Like I said, you don't have to credit me. Pretend it's your idea. I don't give a shit. I just want somebody to figure this shit out. You know. So basically the way it works is another thing you can do is I can take Rowan and I can make clones of him. So Rowan, you're Jango Fett. I'm going to make you a bunch of Boba Fetts, and then these Boba Fetts, I'll put Neuralinks on their brains, and then Neuralink on your brain. So while you're going about your daily life, these fucking clones, which are all in comas, like let's make 100 clones of Rowan. All these 100 clones are learning Rowan's daily life. They're learning everything to know there is about Rowan. And then 20 years later, when Rowan's dying, and these are all 20-year-old Rowans, we terminate your life and create 100 copies of Rowan when we wake these clones up at age 20. So essentially, they'd be 20-year-olds with the mind of a 60-year-old. Like imagine being, or even like 10-year-olds. Imagine a 10-year-old with the mind of a fucking 60-year-old like science professor. They'd be fucking insane. Like they'd go to university as like a little kid, and they'd have all this fucking knowledge that Rowan's been accumulating over his life. It gets very fucking sci-fi in this sense. And basically the way it works is that the BCI develops exactly the way your mind would through neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is how you form memories. You have long-term depression and long-term potentiation. And that's how neural pathways get stronger and other neural pathways get weaker. And that's what's happening when these children are wearing the BCIs. These clone children are learning from Rowan's life. And whenever your neural pathways are strengthened, the Neuralink fires off a stimulus and strengthens the clone's neural pathway as well. And you do this until the mind develops exactly the way your mind would, because the mind of a child is a blank slate. You can mold it to whatever you want. And this has some like fucking ethical issues regarding the free will of the child, and like it's kind of fucked up. But if you really, really want 100 Rowans running around, that's up to you.
So a movie that's very similar to this would be Selfless with Ryan Reynolds.
Yes. I think maybe that's where I got the idea.
Yeah, so he's basically uploading his mind into another healthy body, young body, and if you watch the movie, the guy, the young body, he still has part of his brain still there. He's still part of has some of his consciousness still there. So later on in the movie, he starts remembering his previous life, he starts, there becomes literally two people in the same body, two consciousness.
Yeah. So here's what's different from my idea, which is mind coupling, from the movie Selfless. So in the movie Selfless, Ryan Reynolds, who's like a soldier in Afghanistan or some shit, volunteers to be killed in exchange for the company giving his family money. So he volunteers to die, and the company kills him, and they sell his body to a rich billionaire. The rich billionaire uploads his mind into Ryan Reynolds' body. Here's why that's weird, is because they did it in one day. In just fucking one day, they transferred the billionaire's mind into Ryan Reynolds. What I'm saying is this is going to take like fucking 30 years, 40 years of Rowan running around, living his life, and these clones taking in the data. I think that's more realistic than the one-day mind upload from the billionaire into Ryan Reynolds. That's just a thought. So if someone wants to learn about like neuroscience and make mind coupling a real thing, please do. So yeah, that's mind coupling. That's what I'm calling it. Another idea I had is this one I thought about when I was watching videos about Sergio Canavero. So Sergio Canavero is an Italian neurosurgeon who wants to cut off people's heads and put them on other bodies. So there's a Russian billionaire who agreed to pay Canavero like $21 million or something like that in order for him to put his head on a euthanasia patient's body. And the reason I don't like this is because there's so much fucking immune incompatibility, so that when you put this billionaire's head on, like, let's say some third world African guy signs away his life so that his family can be rich, his wife and kid can be rich, and then the billionaire puts his head on the African body. Here's the thing. The African guy's immune system is going to kill the fucking billionaire's head. It's going to be like, what the fuck is this? You gave me something with new fucking, like, completely incompatible immunoglobins and capsule proteins, surface proteins. All the cells are fucking incompatible. So the immune system is going to think it's being infected and kill the fucking head. So that's why I don't like that.
Yeah,
but
that would be very bad.
Again, what if you had a Jango Fett who creates a Boba Fett of himself, and when he's on his deathbed, he has the Boba Fett terminated and has a surgery of his head getting cut off and put on the young Boba Fett's body. And that's, again, it's kind of fucked up because you got to like kill a sentient being, which is the clone, and then put your head on it. But the reason this would work is because the clone's immune system will not attack your head. It's the same immune system. It's genetically identical to you. So we're not very good at like regrowing spinal cords. So we might have to spend, like, this new clone, this new Boba Fett might have to spend his whole fucking life in a wheelchair. It'll be like fucking FDR, his whole life in his fucking wheelchair, but at least he'll be alive, you know, because we don't know how to attach a spinal cord to a head yet. It's very difficult. So,
and by the way, guys, this is the next thing on our list. So we're is talking about new organs, putting growing our own organs, growing our own hearts. That's what's going. That technology, guys, is already happening right now. There's already labs that can grow our own body parts.
So my fourth method actually relates to that. So this is organ engineering. So my fourth method, I call this mind reconstruction. So mind reconstruction is basically based on stem cell technology being molded into new organs. So you can make a copy of basically any organ. I take cells from Rowan, and I grow those cells into tissues in a lab, and I put the labs into protein scaffolds and create a new heart for Rowan. This is called 3D bioprinting. I have a whole video on it on Transhumania. You can go watch the 3D bioprinting video. But there's one organ I don't talk about, and that's the brain. So what if I could make a copy of Rowan's brain in a fucking lab? What if I could, like the brain in a jar thought experiment? What if I could make a literal brain in a jar? I could make Rowan wear a BCI, and the BCI, it beams the data, like the Neuralink beams the data into this laboratory, into this bioprinter, and it creates a hydrogel scaffold. So a hydrogel scaffold in the shape of whatever Rowan's brain is now. So that when I grow the neural cells, I take Rowan's skin cells, turn them into stem cells, turn those stem cells into neurons, and then grow Rowan a brain from that data. Problem is, whenever it's going to be, when this brain gets transplanted into Rowan's body and his brain gets transplanted out, that new brain that wakes up, the new Rowan that wakes up, will be whatever his mental state was when he had the scan. So let's say, Rowan, you put the BCI on and you scan your neural data to a bioprinter right fucking now, and then you die. When we put this new brain inside you, it'll still think that it was 30-year-old Rowan. It'll still think that it was you now, even though the body is like is different.
Here's a question to that, Alex.
Yeah.
If we can hypothetically copy exactly Rowan's brain into another body, what would be the point then of transporting that brain to Rowan's body? Because
he might have a brain disease. Alzheimer's or some shit. And take his brain out and replace it with another brain. So if he has Alzheimer's, we take out the Alzheimer's brain and put the bioprinted brain inside his skull. That's right, very complicated.
But my question is, if we already can copy exactly to the precise exactness of his brain and consciousness, already copying it, what's the point of putting it now then in Rowan when that already is Rowan? We could literally just utilize that and put it on a brand new body.
So here's the problem. Human beings have what's called there's a scientist by the name of Friedrich Uexküll, who's a German scientist, and he invented this concept called the Umwelt. And he said the Umwelt says your consciousness is determined by your phenomenological sensitivity to the world. So I'm touching this pen. The act of touching this pen is part of my consciousness. So if we just have the brain in a fucking jar and it can't do anything, it's not really Rowan. It's only really Rowan when it's put inside Rowan's body and Rowan is touching the pen and the brain is creating the input-output functions for the touching of this pen. So yeah, that's mind reconstruction, and it relates to the artificial organ.
You're telling me it won't work if we utilize this copy of Rowan's brain and put it into like a robotic body. It would just be a different Umwelt. It would be an Umwelt of a robot rather than the Umwelt of a human. So you could, or you could fucking scan it into a computer, and then it would be the Umwelt of a mind upload. We can do a bunch of things with it. So how that would be very trippy to have two Rowans alive at the same time that are exactly the same replica of the brain. So would he literally be doing the same things?
Perhaps.
Both versions of himself would be doing the same things every second of everything.
Very disturbing, because the computer Rowan might have fewer rights than the biological Rowan. The Rowan might make the computer Rowan a slave. Be like, hey, I don't want to work at my job anymore as an accountant, so computer Rowan will be doing that job instead. you are my slave, computer Rowan, and since we're the same person, I'm gonna go to fucking Jamaica and sip on fucking margaritas at a beach while you toil away your job. The kinds of things that can happen when you create copies of yourself. But yeah, so that's mind reconstruction. Let's talk about the very last idea. I actually have 5 ideas. This fifth idea is kind of stupid. That's why I saved it for last. But it involves AI. So there's a video.
I wouldn't be on a beach sipping margaritas, by the way. I'd be like underground, looking for fairies with the crystal caves.
Sure. Do whatever and have
eating
the fucking
peanut butter.
I have a video called "What Will Humans Look Like in 100 Years," and you can watch that to talk about like the ethics of making copies of yourself. And I think they can get very fucked up. But anyway, this last method is what I call mind duplication, and it's kind of very. You guys ever played the game Mass Effect? Mass Effect fans.
Oh, I saw some game footage of it. I didn't play it, but
there's the first 3 are the best. There's a 4th one, which kind of sucks. It's called Mass Effect Andromeda. But one thing I really liked about Mass Effect Andromeda is this future society of humans is given AI companions. And your character has an AI companion called Sam. And Sam is inside you, like responding to your input. And it's experiencing the world with you. So what if somewhere in the distant future, we give each person a Sam, each child, every child who's born, we make them wear a helmet, like an MRI helmet, and that MRI helmet is feeding data into the helmet, and Sam lives in the helmet. So whenever you get beat up by a bully at school and he takes your lunch money, Sam understands what it's like to be beat up at the school and get your lunch money taken, because the helmet is transcribing the MRI data. And then maybe Sam has his fucking first kiss, or sorry, the kid has his first kiss, and then Sam, the AI, learns what it's like for Billy to have his first fucking kiss. And then when Sam is 80 years old, dying on his fucking deathbed of Alzheimer's, Sam is like, it's okay, Billy. I have all your whole life in here. So I'm gonna be a combination of you and an AI. So you have a super Billy. The Sam goes on to live a life of its own as an AI, but it has Billy integrated into its identity. So it's again, it goes back to like the information theory of death, the biological theory of death, and which one you subscribe to. But if you agree with the information theory of death rather than the biological theory of death, maybe you consider Billy, who has the memory, or sorry, maybe you consider Sam, who has the memories of Billy, to be Billy, or maybe even more than Billy, because he's also an AI with powers. So that's one thing you can do. But there's a philosopher by the name of John Searle who thinks that AIs can never be humans, because what Sam AI is doing is it's only imitating the syntax of Billy's consciousness and not the semantics. So maybe Sam understands what it's like to have the first kiss, but doesn't know what the fuck it means. So that's one possibility you have. And but maybe here's another thing. What if you took Sam and then you created a biological clone of Billy, and then you downloaded the data of Billy the data of Sam, the AI, into Billy's clone body. And then essentially he learns from the AI to be a person again. So you turn Pinocchio into a real boy because he still has the memories of what the previous Billy. So yeah, that's just mind duplication. You can duplicate from the human to the AI and then back from the AI to the human. That's a concept I'm working on. It's very fuzzy. That's why I only said 4 methods instead of 5. But yeah, if you want to, like, if any computer scientists in the chat, if you want to like expand on this idea of mind duplication that I have, be my guest. Refine it, make it better. But yeah, that's the 2045 initiative. What's next on the list?
Perfect. So next on the list is here.
Next on the list is hypothetical God approach.
So you guys want to talk about the hypothetical God?
Yeah, that's been something I've talked a lot about.
So here's the problem. Here's the problem with modern Christianity. Modern Christianity has no concept of immortalism. They think that once you die, your brain will be your soul. You have a soul. I don't think you have a soul. I don't think the soul fucking exists. But whatever you are will get transported to another universe. And here's why I think that's bullshit. John Locke, he's a philosopher. He got into an argument with Descartes. Descartes was like a very fundamentalist Christian who believed in the idea of a soul. Like he believed in the pineal gland. There's a soul that interacts with you and it goes off into some spirit world after you're dead. And John Locke was an empiricist. He says, in order to know about something, you have to measure it. And John Locke says, okay, Descartes, what if God every day replaced your soul with a new soul? Would you be able to tell the fucking difference? Of course not, because God can make an exact replica of Descartes' soul, and he wouldn't even fucking know. So he's like, okay, well, how would I tell the difference? So Locke's like, okay, so let's say you can, you want to know if it's a different soul. You design a scientific experiment to test Descartes' soul, test to see if it's the same soul. And here's the thing, you can't, because a soul has no material properties. So Descartes' idea of the soul is a contradiction, where it says it must causally, an immaterial thing must causally interact with a material thing, but it violates the fucking law of conservation of matter and energy. So if a spirit world is interacting with the material world, it requires a physical cause, and you can't measure that physical cause. Therefore, having a soul and not having a soul is equally as perceptible. So I want to go with like Christopher Hitchens on this, like that which can be postulated without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. So
yeah.
So here's the problem with Christianity is they think there's this soul that's just going to go on. So you can live your life however you want. You can drink, you can fucking crash your car, you can live like a total degenerate, and your soul's just going to be fucking fine as long as you accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior. I really, really, really don't like that, because if you take into account Locke's idea, what if God doesn't give a shit about your soul? What if you don't have a soul and God's like, okay, bye. So, but we have this idea of God as an ordered being. God likes order. So because we live in an ordered universe, and we have to make this ordered universe compatible with the laws of thermodynamics. So we need a new conception of God, where instead of teleporting your soul to some spirit world, he just resurrects it, perhaps. Perhaps God is not a being in space, but a being in time. Perhaps God does not yet exist and will make himself exist retroactively. Perhaps in the future we'll create a super intelligent AI, and that'll be the God. And it'll find a way to create an Einstein-Rosen bridge and cause the creation of the universe so that God creates himself. Mm-hmm. It's very, very trippy, but what I'm getting at is we need a conception of God that's actually compatible with the Bible, because the Bible doesn't say anything about if I die, my soul just fucks off. Because heaven is not, like the kingdom of God in the Bible, is not a place, it's a time. And the time is at the end of the world, at the rapture, the fucking apocalypse or whatever. So in the end, the Bible says, in the end times, God will resurrect everyone who's ever lived and judge them. So that means if you die right now, you're not going fucking anywhere. You have to wait till the end of the world, and then God will resurrect you. And then the kingdom of God is a second earth, and you will live on that second earth. There's no fucking cloud kingdom. The kingdom of God is whatever results from Revelations, what results from the end times. So we need to find an interpretation of Christianity that corresponds with both the Bible and the natural world, because what we have right now is very it's very bad theology and bad hermeneutics. It's not very compatible with what the Bible actually says and what nature actually says. So what we could do for this hypothetical God approach is we look into the history of the Catholic Church, and we find old heresies that the Catholic Church has purged, and see if perhaps they were the right answer instead of the wrong answer. And of course, this is going to be like controversial to people in the comments who are Catholic, and they're like, "Well, the Catholic religion is the perfect religion." Well, how do you know? Like, some of these popes became very fucking corrupt, and they purged very honest versions of Christianity. So, you guys want to talk about like some heresies that have been terminated from history, so to speak?
Sure.
All right. So
one thing that I see with God is in my evidence is I feel like there's one of the biggest evidence that I feel that there could be multiple gods, multiple hypothetical gods, is with our God that we know. Remember, God gave his one and only, his forgotten Son, Jesus Christ, to die for our sins on the cross, right? So we have a history here on earth with our God and Jesus Christ and the atonement, all that kind of stuff. But as we talked about earlier, if the universe is infinite and there's billions and trillions of other planets out there, and there's other Earth, and there's another Earth just like ours, did Jesus Christ go and die on that Earth too? Because they would have had to have the same history that we have for us to have an understanding of religion like we do here on Earth.
And here's where we get to the first heresy. So the first heresy which was purged by the Roman Catholic Church, is called Doceticism. Doceticism says Jesus was actually an illusion. His human form was an illusion. He wasn't actually human. So this goes into the whole hypothesis. It's a gamer with a fucking avatar. And what this says is it doesn't matter how many fucking planets there are with how many fucking Jesuses and how many exact copies of us, because there will be an exact copy of Jesus to every one of those worlds. And because Jesus is an illusion, like his human form was an illusion, you could make multiple copies of Jesus. And that's what Doceticism was. And this was a huge fucking heresy, so they all got purged. Another one we could talk about was Unitarianism, which actually says Jesus is not God. Jesus, God, and Jesus, the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. There's no actual Trinity. There's just one God, and that's called Arianism. And this heresy almost supplanted Trinitarianism, which was the opposite. So, which is there's a Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. So they had like a little civil war at the Council of Nicaea, which was in the eastern half of the Roman Empire, where they were bickering over whether the Arianists or the Trinitarians were right. So eventually, Trinitarianism won out, and all the Arianism got purged from the Roman Empire. But what if you go back and revisit that and say that maybe you don't need historical evidence of Jesus in order to have a hypothetical God who resurrects you? Maybe you could reunite fucking like Islam, Judaism, all these other religions into a common narrative about the resurrection. That's always possible. But yeah, let's get to the next heresy, which is adoptionism, and that denies the virgin birth of Jesus. So I think this was a medieval heresy, and it's basically a bunch of people who got skeptical that Jesus could be born of a virgin. And I think the scientific evidence that came about in the Renaissance about like scientific shit about the way birth works, the way humans like pass on their genes and shit. Once you get to the Darwinist age, some people just say like, hey, you know what? Jesus doesn't have to have been born of a virgin. There could have just been a regular person named Jesus who was raped by a Roman Mary was raped by a Roman soldier, and Jesus was just the product of that. But he just became this amazing human being, and it does not matter if Mary was fucking had a son with God or was just raped by a Roman soldier. All that matters is what Jesus did, like as this historical figure. And there's a historian, Josephus Flavius, a Roman historian, who actually did document the existence of a religious leader who lived in Judea during the time of Augustus, the Roman emperor. And we think that this figure might have been what the four Gospels call Jesus. So what adoptionism says is it does not matter like who Jesus was. What matters is what Jesus did. So that's another heresy you could kind of revisit. But yeah, you guys want to talk about Valentinianism? Valentinianism? Fuck. It hurts.
Sure. I'll say first, but let me say what I think is important about the hypothetical God.
Sure.
Basically, I think that the important takeaway point here is that the reason I think it's important to put hypothetical in front of God, I think that's such a key point because most people don't. And so most people just say, there is a God and it's this way and this way and this way, and God is this way and he'll judge you by this standard. And it's like they pretend to know so much about God. They pretend to know, first of all, there is a God, then they pretend to know all these rules. They know the exact rules of God, and they know exactly that they're saved and all this sort of thing. And it's just like, I think the important point here is to stress hypothetical, because it's like we don't know. That's why we want to freaking live forever physically. We're not counting on any hypothetical gods to save us. We're hoping, we're crossing our fingers. I think all of us, like, we're crossing our fingers here, like we wish, we hope. And we're trying to live in such a way that if there is a hypothetical God, we will certainly be counted as good people according to that hypothetical God, and that hypothetical God would want to save us. Right? If there is such a salvation, we would get it. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to live in such a way where if there's some kind of test in this world, we're going to pass the test. We're trying to pass the test. We don't know what the rules are. I mean, I don't know what the rules are, and some people claim to know what the rules are, but I'm like guessing what the rules might be. I'm like, if there was a God, like, what would the rules be? And I'll just like make an educated guess based upon what I happen to think is.
So here's the problem. A lot of people...
The conscience. I think it's important to use the conscience because, like, okay, you could theorize if there's a God, maybe we've been instilled with this conscience for a reason, right?
That's the only thing that makes that is common among all of us, among all humans. I think all of us have a conscience and a moral code to everything. That is the one and only thing that you could really honestly say that's universal among all humans.
Yeah.
Is we all have some.
Here's the problem with that. The reason a lot of people don't believe in the hypothetical God, the reason a lot of people are atheists rather than Christians, and I trust many of you are familiar with New Atheism, with Dawkins, with Hitchens, with Sam Harris, with Daniel Dennett, and what they did was they pointed out, like, holy shit, the God in the Old Testament is a fucking dick. And it's true. It's true. If you go to like the book of Numbers or the book of Deuteronomy and you look at like the kinds of shit that Jehovah or El Elohim or Yahweh, whatever you want to call him, orders the Jewish people to do, it's pretty fucked up. But then when you get to the New Testament, the God suddenly it's suddenly a very kind God who says like, oh, it doesn't matter what you did, I'll save you. You just gotta accept me. So
well, I mean, he flooded the entire earth and killed everybody but Noah and everything. So but after that, coming into the New Testament, what did he say? He would never flood the earth again, right?
Yeah. So Valentinianism, which is the next heresy I wanted to talk about, actually takes this narrative that, hey, the God of the Bible is not the God of the Bible. The New Testament God and the Old Testament God are different gods. And what it says is that there was this event called the Demiurge. The Demiurge was this evil being who existed at the start, and he was the Old Testament God. So this comes from like Plato. Plato, he was influenced by Zoroastrian priests called Magi, and he developed this narrative of the Demiurge. And what Valentinianism did was it combined this Platonic philosophy with Christianity and said, actually, the Old Testament God is the devil, and the New Testament God is the real God. There's another version of that called Sethianism, and Sethianism says, actually, both the Old Testament God and the New Testament God are the devil, and the real God is fucking the serpent, the snake, that tells Adam to eat the apple because it gives him knowledge of the Demiurge. It helps. The snake was the good guy who was trying, Satan is the real God, and the real God is Satan. So Satan, as the snake, was trying to help Adam and Eve gain knowledge so that they can escape their imprisonment. It's very fucking weird, but yeah, this is like a version of Gnosticism, and these people got fucking purged by the church. So what we want to do is we want to find some way to explain why the Old Testament God and the New Testament God are so different. And my favorite heresy out of all these, the one I'm most sympathetic to, is Catharism. So Catharism was a medieval heresy in like the 1200 BC. And there was people in northern Spain, southern France, and northern Italy, so this general region, were called Cathars. And the Cathars were influenced by Zoroastrianism. And Zoroastrianism says that there's no such thing as the devil in the sense that we understand it. The devil is just controlled opposition, and God can kill the devil anytime he wants. So that makes God evil. So because he's allowing the devil to exist and cause harm. And you could say that, oh, it's just a test. It's just a test. Well, God is just trying to create the ideal human with this test. But that means God isn't all-powerful, because if he was all-powerful, he could just create the fucking human with memories of passing the test. So essentially, what Catharism says is God is not all-powerful. God is actually a being who is casting a shadow, and that shadow is the devil. So you have a duality of good and evil. And Satan is not controlled opposition. Satan is the emergent property of God. The existence of God, whatever he does, creates an equal and opposite reaction, which is Satan. And the way this is explained in Zoroastrianism is, what did God do on the first day? Can anyone know what God did on the first day? Tell me in the comments.
Created the heavens and the earth.
No, on the first day.
The light.
God created light.
Ah, the light.
So what happens when you create light? You get shadows. Light, no matter like where it is, if it's shining, it's going to create a shadow. So what Zarathustra did, the Zoroastrian founder, who later influenced Christianity and Judaism to become what they are today, tried to convince people like a king of his religion. And he said, okay, how do you explain that there's one God and two gods at the same time? So he holds up a candle and he says, look at this candle. The candle is good. It provides light. It provides use to civilization. It's a creative force. But the fact of the matter, just by nature of the candle existing, it's going to create shadows of whatever it's illuminating. And it's not that God is evil. It's that whatever God does creates an equal and opposite reaction. When we look into the laws of physics, entropy, whenever you try to order entropy, or whenever you try to create order, it's going to create chaos. Whenever you create extropy, it's going to create more entropy. So let's say I'm gonna clean my room, right? I need energy to clean my room. So even though I'm creating extropy by cleaning my room, I have entropy in my environment. So it's not that I wanted to create evil. It's just that by nature of doing good, I have created evil somewhere else. So it's like the yin and yang. It's like an eternal fight between good and evil. It's an internal conflict between chaos and order, extropy and entropy, actuality and potentiality. And the Zoroastrians called this Asha and Druj. So Asha, which is truth, light, potentiality, extropy, it comes from Spentamainu. And Spentamainu is the good God, the good side of God, the light, the truth, the way. That's literally what they called it. And the other religions ripped that off. So it's in the Avestas that Ahura Mazda, in the form of Spentamainu, is the truth, the way, and the light. And then there's a dark side, which is called Druj. Druj is the force of entropy. And Druj comes from the god Angramainu. Angramainu is the dark side. This sounds like fucking Star Wars with the force, the light side and the dark side. Angramainu is entropy. It's what degrades extropy. It's what destroys the creations. And it's kind of like the narrative of the devil. The devil just exists to destroy God's creations. And like just as you have a light which is doing something useful by illuminating the world, somewhere else it's going to create a shadow. And it's an everlasting struggle to illuminate the world while the shadows appear somewhere else. So this is what the Cathars believed. And the reason I'm not a Cathar, though, is because the Cathars also had some like fucked up ideas about like how to live. For example, they thought sex was sinful, like the act of fucking reproduction was sinful. Creating new beings was sinful because it caused like suffering and shit. Wow. So instead of having sex, they did it in the butt.
You're kidding me.
Nope.
Oh, that's horrible.
They're like, well, we gotta fuck, so we don't want to create kids, but we also want to fuck, so we're gonna like fuck in the butt. And
then my gosh, they're the most degenerate.
Yeah, and then they're
a cult. They could consider it a cult, right? That's disgusting.
I think they had. Here's the thing. I think Catharism had the correct metaphysical belief about reality. It just had some weird practices in practice, let's say. And eventually, the Pope got wind of this in Rome, and he's like, "Excuse me, they're doing what? They're doing it in the butt, sir." Okay, crusade, fucking crusade. So he gets a bunch of kings in northern France, and he creates what's called the Albigensian Crusade. So the Albigensian Crusade basically amassed this army to march around southern France and northern Italy and kill all the fucking Cathars.
Because they were doing it in the butt.
Yeah.
This is too much. This is like a freaking movie. This is crazy.
Yeah, so here's the sad part. The Albigensian Crusade is like, usually like the alt-right and like white nationalists love the Crusades because it was fighting Muslims. This was white on white. This particular crusade was white on white violence. And it was some of the most brutal fucking white on white violence in the history of Europe. Basically, when the armies came around, they went to every city in southern France and they're like, and they said, we need to kill the Cathars. And the city's like, well, we don't know who's a Cathar and who's not a Cathar. So they're like, okay, lay siege to the city and kill everyone in the city because they're all fucking Cathars. So they went into these cities, killed the women, children, everyone, because we can't risk.
All because of butt sex.
All because of the butt, you know.
I can't believe this. This is unbelievable.
And it was very sad because a lot of these cities, people who weren't Cathars, like just regular innocent people, got killed too. So we got to do what we can to eliminate the butt sex, you know?
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, that's the story of the Cathars. So while I'm not a Cathar, the religious views they got were the metaphysical views they had were the purest form of Abrahamic religion. And it came from Zoroastrianism, which is the first monotheistic religion on earth. And this was a monotheistic religion that also had a doctrine of dualistic monism. And dualistic monism is the yin and the yang. Whenever you have potentiality, you imply the existence of actuality. Whenever you have nothingness, you imply the existence of everythingness. And in the middle, the yin and yang, you got a little squiggly line in the middle. That squiggly line is somethingness. From nihility and infinity, you get finitude. From nothingness and everythingness, you get somethingness. So just the nature of existence is a product of this eternal struggle between Druj and Asha, between yin and yang, between Spentamainu and Angramainu. So
Another example that I know of with the kind of practices of ancient histories is you guys remember, the Egyptian empire, for pharaohs. Pharaohs would always love incest because they felt their religion. They felt that they had to keep the blood within the same blood, and so they had a lot of incest for pharaohs, and that's why you see like King Tut died at a young age, because a lot of the pharaohs were deformed and died young because of a multi-generational incest. Literally, it was going on for like 6-7 generations in a row. Like the first 2 generations was okay, but it was gradually getting worse and worse and worse. And that there's a lot of theories that's really what destroyed the Egyptian empire and pharaohs, was because of the incest.
Yeah, a lot of that in European monarchies as well. The European monarchs, they thought this was like, when you take fucking ethno-nationalism to its most extreme form, it's family nationalism versus everyone else. And unfortunately, that has fucking consequences like inbreeding. We are the master race or master family, and we got to keep it in the family, but you genetically inbreed. Another thing is, I think evolution also works outside of biology. So you can have cultural evolution, you can have AI evolution, you can have physical evolution, like chemical evolution. And that's one of the reasons I like open societies, like decentralized anarchist societies, is because they allow for like diversity of thought to flourish. And when you have authoritarian governments, you force the culture to inbreed, and it creates the culture starts stratifying into, like, hardening into these castes and like limited ways of thinking, such that when a crisis presents itself, you don't have enough ideas to draw from to fight the crisis. And that's fundamentally why I think you should promote not just biological evolution, but cultural evolution. Anyway, what I'm trying to do here is, with respect to Rowan's hypothetical God argument, I'm not trying to bring back all these heresies, right? What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to tell you that not only did we have some of these heresies, but Christianity and Judaism themselves were heresies of Zoroastrianism. Like, they weren't malicious heresies. They were essentially, the Babylonians destroyed Jewish culture, and they took ideas from Persian culture to fill in the gaps. Because when the Persians came, they liberated the Jews from Babylon. And Cyrus the Great, who was the Persian emperor, was such a kind ruler that he said, not only will I return you to your homeland of Judea, I will rebuild your homeland, and I will let you practice your religion. And they really, really kiss his ass in the Bible. The book of Isaiah is when the Persian narrative starts, and the book of Esther is about Jews living in Persia. And Cyrus the Great, the emperor, he's treated with almost a kind of a messianic kind of attitude. And the idea of the Saoshayant, which is the Messiah who will come back and liberate the people, the Saoshayant was stolen from Persian Zoroastrianism by the Jews. And this is when, after the book of Isaiah, you start to hear about the narrative of the Messiah will come one day. And the Messiah is the Saoshayant. And the Saoshayant is going to be a person in human form. So while there were some differences, like, for example, the Persians thought the Saoshayant would be born of a rock, the Christians thought it would be, or the Jews thought it would be born of a virgin or whatever. Mm-hmm. So there's some differences, but this general narrative was taken from Zoroastrianism. So I'm not trying to resurrect a heresy. I'm trying to say, let's recognize ourselves as the heresy and go back into history and try to find the purest form of this religion. And what did we change? And one of the things we changed was we got rid of the devil. We made the devil controlled opposition rather than a force that's dangerous and we should fight. So that's also Zoroastrians, some interesting facts. They actually prayed 5 times a day. So guess where Islam got that idea?
Oh, yeah, very similar.
Yeah, so an interesting story about Zoroastrianism is the story of Salman Farsi. So Salman Farsi was Muhammad's best friend, the Prophet Muhammad, when he lived in Mecca. He had a Persian businessman named Salman the Persian, Salman Farsi. And Salman Farsi was actually a Christian. He converted from Zoroastrianism to Christianity because of how similar they were. And he talked to the Prophet Muhammad and influenced a lot of his interpretation. And Muhammad said, "It's neither Christianity nor Judaism that's true. It's this. I went to a cave and meditated, and the angel Gabriel spoke to me, and he said to write down the Quran." And essentially, that was again, Islam itself was also a heresy from other religions. So it's not like your religion is the pure religion. There's always someone who came before you and developed that idea. So Zoroastrianism today, it's a very tiny religion. Only 80,000 people in the world are Zoroastrians. And most of those people are called Parsis. And Parsis live in India. So like when Islam took over Persia, they killed everyone who was a Zoroastrian. Either you convert or you die. So a small group of Zoroastrians got on a ship and they fled to India, like an island off the coast of India. And when they came there, they met with the Indian king, and the Indian king said, "Why should I accept these fucking migrants? You're going to destroy culture." The leader, he said, "See this bowl of milk? When I add more milk, it will overfill. We will use the resources. However, my people are like sugar. When we add the sugar to the milk, it does not change the level of the milk. It will not spill out of the cup. It will actually sweeten the milk." So he made like an argument for like multiculturalism so that the Zoroastrians can stay in India. But the downside of that was the Parsis lost a lot of Zoroastrian ideas. They started adopting the Hindu gods, polytheism. So they're no longer monotheists. There's very, very, very few Zoroastrians left. And most of them are Parsis who aren't even Zoroastrian. They're Hindus, basically. But there are a couple in the West. For example, Freddie Mercury, the singer from Queen, is a Zoroastrian. Was a Zoroastrian since he's Another one is Morgan.
Okay, so that it would make sense with the butt stuff. No, I'm just kidding.
That's Catharism. Zoroastrian. But yeah, another one is Morgan Freeman. So Morgan Freeman converted from atheism to Zoroastrianism because I guess he's like a very scientifically minded person, and he likes this idea of like entropy and extropy in this everlasting struggle. So yeah, I went to his Wikipedia page and it says he was an atheist, but I'm pretty sure he converted to Zoroastrianism. But yeah, anyway, about Zoroastrianism and the Persian Empire. If we want to talk about the origins of Western civilization, because I know the alt-right really wants to save Western civilization, where did Western civilization come from? Because it wasn't fucking Greece. You know how bad like Sparta was? Like Sparta was a dystopian 1984 society. Essentially, you had the Spartans, which were like the police, and you had Helots, which were slaves, just other Greeks, other white people who were their slaves. And a Spartan soldier could just rape anyone he wants, kill anyone he wants, whenever he fucking felt like it.
Really?
So it was really Sparta, like, I know you've all seen the movie 300. 300 Spartans! We're going to protect Europe from these evil brown people. The Persians weren't brown. The Persians were white, like us. Like we have genetic tests done on Xerxes, the emperor. He left evidence of his genetics behind, and we were able to discern that he had red hair and like was Caucasian in ethnicity. But 300 shows him as like this very like effeminate gay black guy who wants to kill everyone.
7-foot guy, super tall.
But anyway, here's how it really happens. So the movie 300 shows the Persians coming into Greece, and they're like, "We will make you our slaves," and it's like, and they're like, "No, you can't make us our slaves, and we're gonna resist you. This is madness. Madness. This is Sparta." And then he kicks him into a fucking pit. That's not how it happened. What happened was Cyrus the Great, the first Persian emperor, he was like a philosopher king. He wanted to create a benevolent society. And what he did was he created the first provincial rule. He said the cities will rule themselves and we'll have a federal government, but the cities will make their own laws. So you see fucking the American Constitution, the origins of the American Constitution in the Persian Empire, not in the Greek Empire, because in Greece, the Athenians hated the Spartans and they took slaves of each other. And they were very dystopian societies. While Greece did create democracy, Persia created like republics. So they had a document, a constitution, and Cyrus the Great created a constitution which grants religious freedom to everyone in the land. So it's kind of like the First Amendment. This was the first time the First Amendment shows up in Western civilization, and it came from the Persians, not the Greeks. The Greeks actually fucking killed you if you did not accept the gods. For example, Socrates in Athens. Athens was a very democratic and supposedly progressive country, city-state, and they still killed fucking Socrates because he did not accept the Greek gods. Another thing is the Constitution. He also had like he had what's called the Cyrus cylinder. So the Cyrus cylinder is this famous artifact, and it has the Constitution of the Persian Empire written on it. And what it says is we must go around the world and give freedom of religion and abolish slavery wherever we go. So it's kind of like this world police, like the American world police, and we must create freedom. America, fuck yeah! So that was the Persian Empire, not the fucking Greek city-states. So the Persians were more like us than the Greeks were. And here's how it actually happened, the movie 300. So the Persians showed up and they're like, "Hey, you can't be treating people like this. We're gonna liberate the people of these lands." And the Spartans are like, "Fuck you! I want to keep my rape slaves, and I want to keep killing people who disagree with my religion, and I want to keep doing all this shit." And like, "Okay, fuck you. We're gonna invade you and free the people." So the real reason that the Spartans fought the Persians was because they wanted to keep slavery. They were basically the fucking Confederate States fighting against like Abraham Lincoln. So they're like, oh, fuck you, we want to keep slavery, so we're going to send 300 Spartans to kill y'all. But yeah, so if you want to ask what is Western civilization, it's not Sparta, it's Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism created Western civilization. And Plato, who came after this famous battle of Sparta versus Persia, he actually was sympathetic to the Persians, and he took a lot of their ideas. And he created a famous book written by Plato called The Republic. And it was based on the ideas of Cyrus the Great. And Plato argues society should have a philosopher king, a benevolent philosopher king who's educated on the ways of spirituality and can rule benevolently. And in doing so, they will not own property. They will not have several wives and shit. And they will be benevolent. Like their only purpose of their existence will be to study philosophy and make people's lives better with philosophy. So all of these fucking ideas don't sound like they came from Sparta. They sound like they came from Persia. So I think the movie 300, you got to understand the context of that movie. It was made after 9/11, and we wanted to paint the Middle East as like these fucking crazy, evil people. And that's why 300 was made the way it was. It's not. It's in reality, I probably would have sided with the Persians rather than the Greeks. And if you want to know like which society you'd rather live in, like if I were to ask most people, they'd say, "Oh, fuck Sparta. It's so fucking dystopian. I don't want to just like be on my merry way, and then like this fucking like elite military class just fucking rapes me and kills me whenever they want, whenever they feel like it." So I think like Xerxes and the Persians were the good guys in this sense.
Yeah, that's a very fascinating perspective. That's important that people know.
The Zoroastrian god, the word Ahura Mazda, Ahura means like wise lord, and the Mazda, it actually means Titan. So Mazda is like a car company, you know. But actually, Rowan, Google this. Google the Farvahar. So F-A.
F-A.
R-O. Sorry, V-O.
V-O, okay.
H-A-R.
R.
Put that into Google Images, and this is like the symbol of Zoroastrianism. So like the car company Mazda actually has like the Mazda logo. It's kind of like a primitive version of that. It's like the eagle wings, but it's like kind of simplified. So that's a logo. So yeah, the car company Mazda was actually based on Zoroastrianism because it might be a very tiny religion these days. But back in the day, it was the biggest religion. Zoroastrianism had something like 20 million followers in the ancient world.
Wow.
So, whereas Christianity and Judaism, they were as small as Mormonism and Scientology are now. So Zoroastrianism was the Christianity of its day. And then Christianity was the Mormonism of its day. So this just goes to show that just don't pick a religion just because it's popular. Pick a religion because it matches with what we see in reality. Don't pick a religion just because other people are following it. Don't be a lemming. Don't follow other people off a cliff. That's all I'm saying is Christianity might be the biggest religion right now, but maybe 100 years later it might be Islam, and maybe 1,000 years later it might be Mormonism, because Mormons have a lot of kids, you know. So,
I mean, the one and only thing I can think of in the movie that portrays the Persians as better than the Greeks in just the movie context was, you guys remember the soldier that was deformed and everything, and he was rejected by Leonidas and the 300 Spartans, but then Xerxes accepted him in his army and accepted him for who he was. So you know there is a little bit of goodness in that Persian in the movie.
Here's where we get transhumanism from Zoroastrianism, because the Zoroastrians at the time were the only religion that believed in the idea of mind uploading. They had a very weird magical version of mind uploading, where at the end of times, all humans would go into a lake of molten metal, and the metal would be grafted onto them, and they would become machine people, like purified of all vices and sins. And so they had this primitive idea of transhumanism, but they said all that matters. The body doesn't matter. What matters is the mind. And even when you become transformed by this molten metal, those with impure minds will die from the molten metal, but those with pure minds will go on to live as superhumans with Ahura Mazda in eternity. Ahura Mazda also has like kind of a finite life. So another interesting thing about Zoroastrianism is the future is ours to create, rather than in Islam and Christianity. You're just kind of thrown into the world, and you're thrown around by forces more positive than you. In Zoroastrianism, that's not the case. It's if humans do not do what's necessary, the devil will win. and that's why Zoroastrianism creates more action, more fear in people to do things. But it is closer to Western civilization, where it demands action on the part of the populace. You can't just walk around in your daily life and be like, "Oh, my soul's fucking safe anyway. God's just gonna kill the devil at the end of time. All I have to do is accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior, and then I can fucking go to the club and throw dollars at strippers and drink all day." In Zoroastrianism, that's not the case. If you do not do good thoughts, good actions, good deeds, the devil Mainu will overpower Spenta Mainu, and bad things will happen to you. It's a very different religion in the sense of action.
You're right. Yeah, really, like Christianity does breed a complacent attitude regarding death, because so many of them are just so 100% sure that there's an afterlife and they're going there that they don't care very much about curing aging, and it's absolutely true. And then it gets worse when these certain sects of Christianity think they say one prayer and they're saved, right? And then if they're saying this one prayer and they're saved forever and they can do whatever they want, it's like, talk about a way to breed complacency. If you think you can get away with doing anything, living any sort of way, and you got a guaranteed ticket to eternal life, like what? That's like the ultimate way to have a complacent type of person.
Yeah. Another interesting thing about Zoroastrianism giving transhumanism to humanity was that it treated women like people. Women are people under Zoroastrianism. In Greece, they were not. In Sparta, if you were a woman, your job was basically to get raped and have babies. That was your job. Whereas pull up the Cyrus cylinder. So that's their constitution. The constitution granted women like some rights, like they were treated like people. And the reason is because Ahura Mazda is a genderless god in Zoroastrianism. Ahura Mazda is neither male nor female. It's a non-binary, to use the SJW term. But what's interesting is that because Ahura Mazda was non-binary, in terms of gender, women and men were to be treated like with respect. Like one was not better than the other because they had the same mind. Like at the end of time, the Zoroastrians mind upload into these new metal bodies, and what your body doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're a very strong Leonidas Spartan or if you're like the hunchback guy in 300. It doesn't matter what your body was like, because as long as you have good thoughts, good actions, good deeds, you will be transformed at the end of time. And this is the transhumanist narrative, that every human being has value. Every human being, no matter like how bad your genetics are, or how weak you are, or if you're hunchbacked, or if you're not ripped like Leonidas, you have value, and we will create the value at the end of time. You just have to work. Like all that. I'd say like the fundamental ethics of like Zoroastrianism is hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard, and it goes fundamentally against like the alt-right narrative. That like your whole life is just determined by your genetics and you don't have to do anything.
Yeah,
like your
that's very depressing mindset of the alt-right.
So I would say like the Nazi civilization, like Hitler, did come from Sparta, but the like progressive futurist civilization, the origin of that was Zoroastrianism, not Sparta. So anyway, what I'm trying to say here is that I'm not saying like abandon Christianity, just or destroy all Christian churches or whatever, because Zoroastrianism and Christianity were on very friendly terms. So was Zoroastrianism and Judaism. Zoroastrianism, like it morphed into Mithraism, and Mithraism was very similar to Christianity. So there was so little conflict between those religions that the Roman Empire was able to convert from Mithraism to Christianity just like that. It didn't take too much effort because they were so similar and they traded ideas so often. That's why Mithra is often compared to Jesus, if you've seen the movie Zeitgeist. And same with Judaism. The Jews loved the Zoroastrians. They basically became a sect of Zoroastrianism. So that's why the New Testament God is suddenly kinder. There's a good God and an evil God, and we should try to help the good God win against the evil God.
At this point, though, wouldn't you agree that it's not practical that we're going to like grow Zoroastrianism and at this point to protect against the foreign hordes, we need a kind of a religion like Christianity, because what other religion is going to protect against the foreign hordes and like protecting against another type of religion and another culture coming out and dominating and overtaking Western culture, right?
There's two things we can do. We can either convert the enemy to Zoroastrianism, or we can just deconstruct the enemy's religion using Zoroastrianism, just as we've deconstructed our own religion.
Oh, and this comes into your Muslim idea,
right?
Yeah,
so let's talk
Muslim
about like
transhumanists.
there's a lot of notions with Islam and Western civilization and whatnot. And there's a lot of migrants coming into Europe, and they do very bad things like rape people because their religion told them that raping people is okay. And if you go into the Quran, you can find evidence that raping people is okay. So the way Islam propagated was they created an ethic where only Muslims are people and non-Muslims are not people until they convert to Islam. So you are not allowed to rape other Muslims, but you are allowed to rape and kill non-Muslims unless they convert to Islam. So this is where they get the idea that Europeans aren't people like us. We can do whatever we want with them until they convert to Islam. And the reason they're able to succeed is because the way Muhammad structured marriage was he said, every man can have 4 wives, max. So the reason he did this was because in the Arabian Peninsula where Muhammad lived, there was constant conflict. There was war all the time. You think the Middle East is violent now? Wait till you see it in 600 AD. 600 AD to 700 AD, it was super violent. All the males would die every generation. And you had to replace the population. And if you gave every woman 4 husbands, you won't replace the population because a woman can only get pregnant with 1 baby at a time. Every 9 months. But if you have 1 man with 4 wives, you quadruple the rate of population growth. So the way Muhammad was able to conquer all other territories in just 30 years was he had this quick way of replenishing the population. And what this would do is in the Islamic culture, this would create gender imbalance, because if the Islamic Chads, let's call them Chad, if the Islamic Chads each have 4 wives, then the Islamic incels have no wives. There's 4 times as many Islamic virgins as there are Chads. So what are the incels going to do? The Islamic incels go invade other countries and take war brides, aka rape slaves, and that creates more incels. And those incels convert to Islam and they invade other countries. So it propagates like a virus. What you have to do is you have to reinstill the Zoroastrian ethic into Islam. You have to make the Muslims recognize where Islam came from. And it also came from Zoroastrianism, Salman the Persian. So Salman the Persian, so as a Zoroastrian, he thought women were people. You should treat women nicely. But Muhammad, the way he wrote the Quran, he said, well, men actually should have more rights than women, and they should be able to have multiple wives and shit. So the way we reform Islam is to get Islam to recognize its influences. So Salman the Persian was a businessman who met Muhammad, befriended him, and sort of helped create the Islamic religion with him. But so Muhammad would go into trances. He would meditate, and the angel Gabriel would speak to him. He would say something Muhammad was a poet, so he loved poetry, and that's why the Quran is easy to memorize because it's very poetic. It's smaller than the Bible, but there's a lot of things you can turn into hymns and when you pray 5 times a day. But anyway, Salman and a bunch of other Muhammad's friends would write the hadiths. So the hadiths were the part of the Quran that details the teachings that Muhammad would give out, because Muhammad was illiterate. He couldn't write, but when he went into the cave, he was given the ability to read but not to write. So he was able to dictate the Quran to people. But he wasn't able to write it himself. That's why it seems to kind of contradict itself, because the Quran the hadiths had multiple authors. You didn't have the original text of Muhammad. So essentially, Salman the Persian, Salman Farsi, was a Zoroastrian, but he was very smart and he could learn Arabic. So that's why he became one of Muhammad's generals and also the authors of the Quran. And So Salman Farsi would help Muhammad conduct trench warfare. He was very smart. He knew how to build siege equipment. He knew how to organize military so that they could fight. So he was basically Muhammad's right-hand man. And basically, because Muhammad himself practiced polygamy, it became okay in Islam to practice polygamy. And the reason that didn't happen in Christianity was because Jesus didn't practice polygamy. Jesus was actually like MGTOW. He was kind of like Diogenes. He had no. Some people say shit about Mary Magdalene was Jesus's wife. I don't think that's true. I think Jesus was he got internal validation rather than external validation. He was not paired up, so to speak. But anyway, the way in which Islam was structured, where they could have multiple wives, helped grow the caliphate. So that's why they're able to take over Europe so well. And rather than just create a fucking race war between Europeans and Muslims, you have them both recognize the origins of their religion, not necessarily destroy their religion, but help them revive the religions. So in a way, I'm preaching a more orthodox, more traditionalist version of Islam and a more traditionalist version of Christianity. reject modernity, return to tradition. You know, that fucking meme. I think we should do that because Zoroastrianism was the original Abrahamism.
Right. But it's so hard to reform a religion, especially Islam. I feel like of all the religions, it's the one designed not to be reformed. It's so resistant
it's possible. So I know it's possible because it's happened before. Around the 9th century AD, there was a man named Al-Farabi. So Al-Farabi was a Muslim scholar. He discovered a book that was preserved and not burned down during the Dark Ages, because a lot of books were burned when the Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire were collapsing. But he found this book, and it was by a man named the philosopher Aristotle, like this, the disciple of Plato, and Plato had Zoroastrian friends, like Zoroastrian magi, who helped him formulate his worldview. So essentially, Al-Farabi rediscovered the Zoroastrian ideas through Aristotle, and he translated them. So Al-Farabi was the first philosopher of what we can call the Islamic Golden Age. And the Islamic Golden Age was when the Muslims had a little bit more religious tolerance, like the Zoroastrians. They had a little bit more freedom of speech. They explored science. They explored technology. They were more advanced than the Europeans for a while. So here's where we can show Muslims embracing like transhumanist ideas could make your civilization better than your enemy's civilization. Like they were technologically advanced than Europe. A lot of the technology the Crusaders brought back to Europe came from Muslims, like the idea of like pigeons and like gunpowder, and a lot of this the numbers we used to write with like I's and V's and D's, like Roman numerals, and they were shit for doing math. But all these Islamic philosophers invented better number systems, and using math, we were able to create science. We were able to create the Industrial Revolution. So it's thanks to Al-Farabi, and who should give thanks to Aristotle, that we were able to create this. Another thing is there was another Islamic philosopher in the Golden Age. His name was Avicenna. He's my favorite Islamic philosopher because he was kind of a transhumanist. He talked about like the mind uploading, and he had an experiment called the floating man. And he says, who am I really? Who are people? What if I took away my organs? What if I took away my limbs? He imagined himself he was locked. This was around the time like the Golden Age was collapsing, so he was locked in a prison for his ideas. And in this prison, he was able to meditate on what identity is. And he talked about like basically getting rid of all your organs till you're left with your mind. And he developed like a very primitive version of mind uploading, which was later copied by Descartes. So Descartes, the guy, the mind-body dualism. So he was a big fan of Avicenna. So it basically created European philosophy, European modernism from Ibn Sina, who copied Al-Farabi, who copied Aristotle, who copied Plato, who copied Zoroastrianism. So we have common ideological roots. And during the Islamic Golden Age, if you created a heresy like the Cathars did, we would just cut your fucking head off. Whereas the Islamic Golden Age was more willing to explore new ideas. And we have to return Islam to the Islamic Golden Age. We have to revive those ideas, the ideas that made Islam closer to Zoroastrianism. Because Islam right now, the Islamic world is in a dark age, and we have to help them get out of the dark age. And I think that's better than just starting a race war between Europeans and Muslims, So that's just my take. Any thoughts, Rowan?
No, I like it. If it can be done, I definitely think Islam should be reformed. Freak. Because the way it is right now, it does seem like a dark age, like you're saying. Do you guys have a favorite depiction of, while we're still on the topic of the hypothetical God, do you guys have a favorite depiction of God from any, like, movies? Like a character in a movie that's depicted as God? Anything come to mind?
That's an interesting...
I can think of a few different movies that depict a God. Dogma. What do you think about the Dogma depiction with Alanis Morissette? You guys know that one?
I'm not familiar. In that movie where she's God? God is a she? What is it, Bill and Silent Bob? Or is it...
Yes, that's the one with Bill and Silent Bob. Jay and Silent Bob, yeah. I like that one. That's my favorite one.
You can play the clip if you want. My favorite depiction of God is Morgan Freeman.
Yes.
Just in that white suit. He's just he's very calm, very collected, very articulate, how I imagine God would be. And he's also a Zoroastrian, so he's willing to explore new ideas despite being previously atheist. So I was kind of inspired by that to like abandon atheism and go look for what gave humanity the will to live, what gave us the ability to transcend nihilism.
Right. You still there, Max?
We got Alanis Morissette. We got Morgan.
I'm still here.
You have a favorite depiction of God from any movies? We got Alanis Morissette, Morgan Freeman so far. That's funny. I have a black man and a girl. That's God. So
talking Morgan Freeman from the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Or are we talking him as a celebrity himself?
As a character that depicts God. So we're just trying to figure out all the. If you could think of any characters that depict God in any movies. I like the Morgan Freeman one too. That's a good one.
Yeah, it is a good one.
He is very calm and collected. Like
long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, Morgan Freeman existed. That's a good depiction. Anyway, what's next on our list? We kind of went on a tangent there to Christian heresies, and then
something very similar to gods and everything that we can talk about, and that we haven't touched base at all yet. So we've talked a lot about our list already. One thing we haven't said anything about is reincarnation. What are you guys' thoughts on reincarnation? So my thought on reincarnation is there's a lot of evidence of reincarnation. There's a lot of videos of people that. So basically, first off, what reincarnation is the theory that when we die, we come back to life as someone else, as a completely something else, or some people believe even something else, maybe even another animal, or not even human. Maybe we come back as a bug, or a rat, or a rabbit. So there's a lot of evidence on reincarnation, where one in particular is one of my favorites. Is a boy has a perfect life of what his previous life of. He was an air pilot. Talked about, or no, there's that example, but actually one that's even more perfect than that. There's one that talked about a African lady. He thought he was his previous life was an African lady in Chicago, and her house burned down and everything, and she was going over what his favorite things are, all that stuff, and looked into detail. That exact person died in a Chicago fire, exactly what he said. That wasn't even on the news. And talked to the family members, and they exactly had the same similarities, same everything from what the boy said. So there's a lot of proof on reincarnation. So it is an interesting concept with a lot of great evidence. What are your guys' thoughts? That's my thoughts on it.
So I want to tie this back into the previous discussion we had about the 7 theories of death. So there's a philosopher by the name of Derek Parfit, and he was basically trying to defend. He was arguing against the information theory of death. So the information theory of death is where it doesn't matter who you are as long as the atoms who are you reincarnate into a new copy of you. But Parfit asks, well, you guys have seen Star Trek, right? Let's create a thought experiment using Star Trek and the teleporter from Star Trek. So the way the teleporter works is, let's say Commander Riker, Captain Picard is on a planet, and we want to beam him back to the Starship Enterprise. So we beam him up by disintegrating the atoms that make up Captain Picard, scanning every atom, and then reconstructing those atoms on the Starship Enterprise. So using new atoms, we made a copy of Captain Picard while killing the old one. So we have literally killed Captain Picard. But the information theorists are like, actually, that is Captain Picard because the information of those particles is the same. And it's a direct copy of Captain Picard. Whereas Derek Parfit said, wait a minute. So you destroyed Captain Picard on the planet by disintegrating the atoms that made him up. But you didn't take those atoms up to the Enterprise. You just took new atoms from the replicator and made a copy of Captain Picard. So it's not the same person.
I agree with that guy. I agree with that guy 100%. Not the same person.
I have a video on my channel called The Philosophy of Identity, and I have like a whole section devoted to Derek Parfit and his theory of the causality theory of identity, whereby it's not just a pattern, because if it was just a pattern, there'd be millions of copies of me in this universe. The universe is infinitely large, and if you travel far enough, you'll find enough statistical permutations of the atoms such that there are exact copies of us having the exact conversation we're having right now with the exact same consciousness. So how do we distinguish between those people and us, these people? Well, we have different coordinates in space-time. And this brings us to our next discussion, which is the slowing down time approach. So we could talk about the nature of time.
Let's talk a little bit about reincarnation more a little bit first. So what I think about reincarnation, Max, is that I would be a skeptic because I just know there's a lot of charlatans right out. There's a lot of people who want to make money selling a book or whatever. So I'm not sure that, and like little kids, they can be trained on what to say. They can be coached. I've heard different theories that a lot of these reincarnation stories are just like made up. But there's also the genetic memory idea that maybe the kids are picking up on a genetic memory in their ancestors, their great grandmother, whatever. Like somehow some memories can transmit through the gene pool, and they're picking up on those memories, something like that. So there's just different ways of possibly explaining it. But it's an interesting possibility. It's just like one of those things like wishful thinking. Here's another thing. Let's say it were true. It hardly provides any comfort. It's not good enough. It's not a way to really live forever because you forget. If you reincarnate as someone else, it's like you lose what? All your memories. You can't remember anything. So it's practically like you died and a new person got created anyways. It's like I can't remember any of my past lives if I had any, right? So it's not a great comfort either. You know, it's not like a solution.
And it's not really comfort too. Like, what if you just come back as, like something horrible, right? Or not even human, right? So, in a worse situation that you had in this life. So, right. Yeah, it's definitely not comforting for sure.
Yeah. As a final comment on reincarnation, back in that teletransporter paradox, we have to accept the fact that this is a form of mind uploading that's not exactly possible. So if I have Captain Kirk on some planet and I'm trying to beam him back to the Enterprise, what I've done by scanning every particle is I've collapsed the quantum wave function. So I don't know if you guys ever heard of the observer effect. When you observe a particle at the quantum level, you change its behavior. So how can I get the exact same copy of Captain Kirk as there was on the planet if I collapsed all the wave functions? So this is another sense of how this kind of reincarnation isn't perfect. You can't just teleport Captain Picard from the planet to the Enterprise. It's because of quantum mechanics and the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, you can't do it because the Heisenberg uncertainty principle says the more information I have about the position of a particle in a quantum state, the less I know about its momentum. And the more I know about its momentum, the less I know about its position. So you have uncertainty as to what that particle was. And by looking at it, I've changed it. So it's just very interesting whether or not it's possible. Anyway, you guys want to move to the next thing on the list?
Yeah, I think it would be cool to talk about something that we haven't talked about yet.
Yes, the next thing after hypothetical God, heaven, reincarnation, physical resurrection, the next thing on the list is slowing down time. That's interesting, slowing down time. So
yeah,
the thing about mind uploading, it's if you upload a mind to a computer, you're no longer using biological neurons. And biological neurons are very slow. They're something like 3 meters per second. That's how fast they can send a signal. Whereas if you have a transistor, it can send signals at half the speed of light. It's very fast, those electrons. So what if you could think faster because your mind uploaded? This new robot body would be able to think millions of times faster than I can. So what this would do, I think, it would slow down our perception of time. So there's a philosopher, Henri Bergson, and he had a debate with Albert Einstein. So they were both like Jewish intellectuals, and they were having this debate about the nature of space-time, and they were very similar in their views, Einstein and Bergson. So Bergson said, we have space-time is actually an illusion. We have clock time and phenomenological time, and the difference between those things is socially constructed. It's kind of blurry. And Einstein made like a physical argument, like we have relativity, general relativity, and special relativity. If you jump on a beam of light and you're going the speed of light, a copy of you here on Earth would experience time normally, whereas for you, time would freeze. That's special relativity. And then general relativity, you guys have seen Interstellar, right? Matthew McConaughey gets on a spaceship, goes to the black hole, and while he's there for just like, I don't know, 1 hour, going all right, while his fucking daughter back on Earth is now a grown woman, like older than him.
Yeah, so for every 1 hour, it's like 10 years down on Earth.
That's general relativity, which says the closer you are to a very heavy gravitational object, the more time will slow down for you. Whereas somebody far away from heavy gravitational objects, like his daughter, ages very fast. So,
and that's already proven. Time has already been proven that it slows down just by how fast we go. So, like, even people that are on the International Space Station that are orbiting Earth right now, it's been proven that they're aging and their time is slower and slowed down to relative to people here on Earth.
Exactly, and we could talk about another concept. Next on the list is time machines. So, how do you build a time machine? Those watching right now, here's a very cool sci-fi story you could probably adapt to real life, and let's conceptualize a distant future where we have the technology to travel through space and such. So, let's say we travel through space and we're able to build space stations anywhere. So, what if we travel to the center of our galaxy and build a space station on a black hole? And let's say we have rich billionaires like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos who are like, you know what? I want to see what the year 3000 is like. I only have 80 years to live, but I want to see the future. So they could maybe go to this space station and spend a month there, just hang out by the pool, doing whatever. And then when they come back to Earth, it'll be 1,000 years in the future. So they have time traveled by just being close to the black hole and coming back. And I don't know if you guys have seen Planet of the Apes. So this is a general relativity time machine. In Planet of the Apes, there's a special relativity time machine whereby the astronauts hop in a spaceship and they travel very, very fast. And because they're traveling fast, special relativity, time on Earth is passing fast. And then when they come back, the planet is ruled by fucking apes. And they're like, what? Oh, we must be on a different planet. But it was actually Earth all along in the future. They just didn't know because they were going so fast in that fucking spaceship that they traveled through time. So that's two kinds of time machines you can create. Then the third kind of time machine is Einstein-Rosen bridge. So I already talked about like wormholes, how if you get negative matter, you could fold space-time in on itself. You could fold it in on itself so that you can take a shortcut rather than having to re-experience fucking trillions of years. So 3 time machines you can use to fight the Reaper, so to speak. Next on the list.
Next on the list, cryo sleep approach. So the best example.
We already talked about that. Dream approach.
Dream approach is the Inception movie approach.
Yeah, so,
do you guys know the cryo sleep approach? That's like in the movie Prometheus, right? They go into a little cryo sleep.
Or 100 is cryo sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Very popular show.
Then there's the Odin sleep. The Odin sleep.
Yeah, we kind of talked about that with like the simulation thing, where the dream approach, where you can create alternative realities that let you experience time slower. So, you know, when you're playing a game on a computer and the game's really good, time flies when you're having fun. But you could also slow it down because our perception of reality is relative. Next on the list is lifestyle, which we talked about. Okay, so we got 3 things left. We have
Parabiosis.
Yeah, so
you know what that is, right?
Yeah, so it's when you take the blood of young people and you put it into old people. There's a billionaire known as Peter Thiel,
mm-hmm.
and he invested in a company called Ambrosia, where you basically have these young people like fucking on several different kinds of supplements and like running on a treadmill and trying to keep their blood healthy so that they can give it to these rich billionaires, and they get paid very handsomely for it. But it's kind of dystopian because these are real life vampires. It's basically the myth of the vampire has come true, just like the myth of alchemy has come true through super colliders, and just like the myth of Zoroastrianism has come true through like prosthetic limbs and shit and artificial organs. And anyway, the last 3 things we have on the list are mining on the other planets, space atmosphere, and alien salvation theory. So you guys want to talk about space for a while?
Yeah, so the mining one is one of the ideas that I had. So here, mining. This is my idea on that, and this is why I think it's a really good method. Is hypothetically, let's say everything that we talked about with methods of how we can conquer aging just doesn't work here on Earth because of the limitations that we have, like the periodic table here on Earth, the elements that we have available to us here on Earth is not sufficient enough to allow us to find a way. Then a solution to that would be going to other planets or other solar systems that have completely different elements, completely different tools that we could utilize to test with and see if those elements can answer our questions. So mining elements on other planets is definitely a very interesting topic. But just how can we? Right now, it's very difficult because we haven't even haven't traveled past our own solar system. Right. We haven't even had a man travel past. We haven't even had a man land on Mars yet. So we've only had robots land on Mars. So we're definitely very far from that aspect. But yeah, those are my thoughts on that.
I think it's a great idea. Could be very
important. Here's my thoughts on asteroid mining. We're coming through a very difficult crisis whereby we're running out of what's called rare earth metals. Rare earth metals are lanthanides and actinides, and we use a lot of those in our transistors and our computers. So when we run out, which is about by the 2030s, the late 2030s, we're going to start running out of these elements, most of which are in China, not here. So China is going to have the whole supply, and there's going to be very little of it left on Earth. So what are we going to do? Are we going to stop building computers, or are we going to find a way to get the lanthanides and rare earth metals from somewhere else? And this is where I think the space industry will have a rebirth in the 2030s, is because we'll use Elon Musk already has kind of a monopoly with SpaceX, and he's going to see the potential to make money off his monopoly by mining asteroids. And he's going to get these rare earth elements and maybe sell them to everyone else at a huge inflated price. So just like Tesla is buying up all the lithium mines, maybe Elon will buy up all these asteroid mines and sort of keep the information economy alive by gathering rare earth metals for our computers. So that's one way in which the singularity, maybe it could be revived. It won't have to die before we live forever. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing we could do. And the last thing on our list is
let's talk a little bit more about the super centenarians, because I think that's an important point that we're. Do you guys think that there's any super centenarians that maybe science doesn't acknowledge but that are still true, and that maybe they've even lived longer than 127 or whatever the supposed max is? There's different stories of different people in Asia or whatever that lived really long time. Do you think they're all just made up?
So there's Dan Buettner. He's a life extension researcher. He wrote a book called Blue Zones, where he looks at the longest living populations on Earth. There's one on Okinawa, one on Sardinia, one in here in California, Loma Linda. There's one in Ikaria, which is an island in Greece. But there's one that he missed, which was the Himalayas. So in the Tibetan mountains, where the climate is very different, where the oxygen content is very different. So you know what we talked about earlier about oxygen causing aging. So oxygen creates the erosion, just as oxygen rusts the iron, the oxygen also rusts.
The state of stress is oxygen.
Right.
But the higher you go in the mountains, the less the concentration of oxygen. And where is the highest altitude on Earth? Take a wild guess.
The Himalayas.
Mount Everest.
Yeah, so the Himalayas, Tibet, Nepal, that general region is the fifth blue zone, where we haven't explored it that much, but we find all these crazy Buddhist monks who've been living for God knows how long by just taking these herbs in the mountains and just controlling their breathing, not taking in as much oxygen, living longer because of the way the atmosphere is structured. So another thing we can look into is what do they eat there.
And so that raises a question though about exercise, because I also talked to an Indian guy who was into yoga and stuff, and he was acting the more you breathe, the faster you die. And he even said even exercise is bad, but we hear so many good things about exercise, so there's a conflict there. If exercise makes you breathe more, in one sense, it's making you.
There's two types of exercise: aerobic exercise and anaerobic exercise. So earlier we talked about high intensity interval training, and the high intensity interval training is about I would rather have 5 minutes of anaerobic exercise than 30 minutes of aerobic exercise. In that 5 minutes, you're taking in less oxygen than you would in the 30 minutes of jogging. So it's better to sprint without oxygen than to jog with oxygen. Another thing is called box breathing. You guys want to do box breathing? So this is a way you get more oxygen into your cells for less effort. So it goes something like this: 4 count in, 4 count hold, 4 count out, 4 count in. Sorry, 4 count breathe, 4 count hold, 4 count out, 4 count hold. So,
okay. So 4, 4, 4, 4, 4,
4. Okay. So ready? We're gonna do. more oxygen for less effort, less. You're getting more oxygen to more of your cells, and you're rather than just breathing like hyperventilating, only getting it to a few cells and getting them more oxygen. So it's not only more efficient for the way in which your body operates, but it's also probably getting you more like efficiency for less effort.
More bang for your buck.
Yeah, pretty much. And
if we can find an alternative healthy form of oxygen that we can breathe that can do the same for our body that oxygen does for our body, that would be ideal. And just really fill our homes up with that particular, substance.
Sure. So that's box breathing. Another thing we find in the Himalayas. So these monks, when they meditate, they breathe just like I just did. They breathe very deep breaths, very slowly. And I know the take a deep breath shit is kind of new agey. Like, oh, these fucking hippies thinking I can control my life with my breath. But no, remember what I said about cortisol? You want less cortisol. You want less stress. You breathe slower. It's not like new age woo woo. This is actual science, whereby you can control your stress with your breath. And if you control your stress, you control your hormonal profile. Better hormonal profile, longer life. So that's one thing that these Himalayans do. Another thing they do is there's a plant there called rock lotus. So rock lotus, it's one of these wild herbs that has a hormetic effect. It's a hormetic stressor, whereby it gives you a little bit of stress, not too much, just a little bit, that stimulates your body's immune system and repair and regenerative effects, such that your body's repairing more often, just because of this little alarm. And in doing that, you live longer. So that's one thing to look into is rock lotus extract. So how long have we been going on this stream?
But see, I think real quick.
Holy shit, guys! We have like 3.5 hours. Who's still watching? How many people are watching, Rowan?
3 people.
Let's see.
I'm looking at 3 people.
3 people.
So one thing with the super centurions is so Alex, you brought up the approach with all these other civilizations and everything in the Himalayas and the air and all that kind of stuff. But if that there still is a terminology where people live long in United States, people live long in France, people live in all different sides of the world. So it's not just that. There's a side of it where the genetics and the genes are at play here, and if we can figure out what it is that they have, because even dieting, there's so many centurions that have horrible diets and chocolate and eating terrible stuff. So
hey, chocolate's good for you. Jean Calment was the oldest lady, and she ate like 2 pounds of chocolate a week.
Chocolate has a compound called resveratrol, which is what you also find in red wine. So maybe it has something to do with that. But anyway,
and it has PIA, which is the love chemical. Yeah. It's good for your brain. It makes you feel like you're in love, and it's just awesome.
So what you were saying earlier about genetics is what we have.
Magnesium too. Wait, magnesium. That's important for longevity too. The heart.
Yeah.
So what we have now is deep learning, which is a subset of machine learning. And one thing we could do with deep learning is we could take the genomes of millions of young people and the genomes of millions of old people, and then compare them and see, like, hey, where does aging take place? And then we use machine learning to look at different kinds of old people, and we analyze their genetic variants. And through analyzing their genetic variants, we determine which one of these old people are which genes are helping these old people live long. So it's really AI that's going to help us like take advantage of centenarian genetics. But yeah. Anyway, that's like goes back to like supercomputers like Watson and like disease modeling and AI in general, which is further down the line. But once we have super intelligent AI, we're going to see faster progress in biotechnology and nanotechnology than we would have had if just humans were doing it.
And speaking of that, it's one thing on our list is AI being able to have a Watson that's specifically designed solely to find the cure to aging, and that would be very helpful for sure, because the human mind can only do so much, but a robot like a Watson can map out the entire genome that things like humans can't do. So and put 1,000 different simulations all at once that it's super quick. So yeah.
Do you have a favorite? You guys have a favorite robot in any of these movies? Mine would be Ava from Ex Machina. What's your guys' favorite robot?
Ex Machina is a really good one. My favorite, yeah.
Because he fears his own death.
Who?
HAL 9000 from Space Odyssey.
Oh.
That is good.
Yeah. And then,
another one of my favorites is Transcendence. I like Transcendence.
and then
I would consider that a robot, but
so Rowan, so what's the last thing on our list? I think we're getting to the end of the list.
it's called Supercomputer Watson type. Oh no, that's what we just
did.
did.
That's the last thing.
Yeah,
Next.
that's the last one. We're done.
That is the last one. Yeah.
So you guys want to do questions? Questions from the audience?
Let's do questions.
Okay. Answer some questions.
Here we go. Changing to chat view. Boom. There used to be more. That's weird. It like erased some because we haven't looked at it. So it like erased the ones at the top because there used to be more in here.
We've been talking for a while.
Do you guys?
Okay.
I can see right from the start, Rowan.
Okay.
I haven't changed anything. So first, I even have it all the way from test 1, 2, 3, 4. So South Paul says, "Death to the Reaper." I like that slogan. Who came up with that? That's
hold on. Share your screen. Share your screen so we can see. On Skype, go to settings. Share screen. The 3 dots, or actually, sorry, the bottom, the where it says share screen.
All right, here we go. Share screen. All right, can you guys see my screen here?
Yep.
Yep. Oh, there we go.
Okay. Comment number 1, Death to the Reaper. I like that slogan. Who came up with that? Oh, that was me. You're welcome. Comment number 2 from South Paul. What supplements do you guys take? A lot of things. It's very subjective, but that's a whole nother podcast.
That's a whole nother podcast.
Captain Genesis says,
hold on. Decline that real quick.
So, Captain Genesis says, any exciting news in the field of anti-aging? We kind of answered that for the past 3 hours.
Yeah.
Ashley Bravo says, is there a deeper meaning to the blue oyster culture?
Decline that real quick. Sorry. Keep going.
Is there a deeper meaning beyond the cowbell? Oh yeah. Watch that skit. If you have a YouTube, type in Christopher Walken Blue Oyster Cult skit. It's a skit on the Don't Fear the Reaper. But yeah, here's this song can have many different meanings. This was from like the 70s and 60s, where a lot of Eastern religions were coming into the West, and they were talking about like, what does it mean to die? Which is this entire podcast. We talked about what does it mean to die, and a lot of that is can you overcome this like erosion, and a lot of it, there's like some romance tied into it, and I think it's like you can interpret it either as like YOLO, don't be afraid of death, or you can interpret it as we will live on after death, or you can interpret it as let's have a life-affirming view of the world rather than a death-affirming view of the world. So there's so many interpretations you can do from the Don't Fear the Reaper song. Next question. Does Joe Biden have any takes on aging? Yeah, he's showing us the dangerous effects of Alzheimer's on leadership. So I don't know. Are we gonna get fucking invaded by China if he becomes president? Or like, is he gonna remember what China was or what Russia was? He's like I don't know. Lol, this guy is awesome and funny. Yeah, Max, they think you're funny. That's cool. You got a good sense of humor.
No, I think they're talking about you, Alex.
Maybe. Was it because I curse a lot? Maybe it's because I curse a lot. Luke Andre says, have you guys looked into flat earth? Yeah, it's bullshit. Anyway, next question. Islam should abolish male genital mutilation. I totally agree with that. I totally agree. Again, we have this idea of like every person has a unique spark, and we should let them determine their own life rather than like forcing our fucking views on that. That's why I really like how Zoroastrianism was the origin of Western civilization. And if you want to talk about like the Roman Empire, the roads in the Roman Empire were copied from the Persian Empire. So the Persian Empire was the first empire in human history to have a network of roads. All roads lead to Persepolis. And then Alexander the Great burned Persepolis down, so the fucking roads are useless. But the Romans, the Greeks, the Alexander the Great's army are like, hey, these roads are very fucking convenient. Let's start doing this in Greece. So they start building roads in Greece, and the Romans copy the Greeks. So, and then they build their network of roads. So it's very interesting how like the Persian Empire was what I'd call like the first civilized, like what in the Western civilization sense, the first Western civilization. So next question. Thought criminal, if my consciousness could come into existence once, it's not implausible that it could come into existence again. Yeah, your consciousness can, but consciousness is not the same thing as identity. So we've had a huge discussion of identity and what it means for you to be you. And everybody has a different conception of that. So we talked about what does it mean to die. Some people think you can live on after your consciousness is gone, and some people think you can't. So it depends on how you define your identity. Do you define your identity as memories? Do you define it as consciousness? Do you define it like Rowan and Derek Parfit do as causality and continuity? Do you define it as the Hindus do, whereas me is the universe, I'm the universe, and if the universe lives forever, I'll live forever. Do you define it with quantum mechanics? Do you think that your multiverse copies are you? Are you a Buddhist? Do you believe there's no ego and just your identity is whatever thoughts you have in your brain? So many interpretations. I do a video on it. It's my most recent video. Check it out. Thought Criminal says, atoms don't have token identities, though. Atoms are excitations of quantum fields, not like little billiard bars. Well, actually, the particles inside the atoms are excitations. And if you get into like supersymmetry, are those particles really different particles, or are they the same particle? And if they're the same particle, why are things different? Maybe it's the pattern that we're organized in that gives us the perception of difference. And maybe we're all actually the same. And identity is only an emergent property. So we want to preserve the emergent property. Some people don't, some people do. It's subjective. What can I say? Next question. The wave function doesn't collapse. So there's many interpretations of quantum mechanics. The two most popular are the Copenhagen and the Everett. So the Everett's many worlds says the wave function doesn't collapse. Your universe just divides into two universes every time a particle does a thing. So basically both possibilities happen. But if you accept the Copenhagen interpretation, then trying to look at the particle does collapse the particle. So depends on what interpretation of quantum mechanics you take.
That's it. See all the questions.
Yeah. Thank you guys for asking questions.
All right. So we'll meet with Brent tomorrow. I just talked to him on Facebook, and he says he's tired and he needs to sleep. So I think
saw that too.
We covered everything we need to cover. Final thoughts?
Yeah, it was good. Final thoughts is there's a lot of freaking strategies on how to live forever, and don't take everything, think about your own eternal life strategy. Take it into your own hands. It's so important. You can't just trust your eternal life to somebody else to do the thinking for you. So it's just like in school. If you're gonna don't just look at what your neighbor's doing and cheat on their test because they might be doing it wrong. So you got to think it out for yourself. And everything we said here, this is just a fraction of what you should be spending a lot of time. Just spend time, prioritize your eternal life, and how you spend your time says a lot about what is valuable to you. And so spend some time thinking about your own strategy to live forever. Leave no stone unturned, and this is the most important thing you could ever be doing with your life, trying to live forever. So
perfect.
That's mine.
Yeah, my final thoughts are just the reason for all this is there's, as we talked about, there's so many different methods to how we can accomplish the same goal, and ultimately our goal, guys, is just to not rot and be non-existent, right? We want to have something to look forward to after death, and or not after death, but without dying. So
that did not sound right.
That was a bad example. So we want to have a way to live forever, and there's so many different ways to go about doing that. It should give us more confidence that, hey, this can happen. There's a lot of different ways. Just all it takes is just one of these methods to work, and we have it all. So don't put, and that's another thing. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. If Dmitry Itskov is putting everything he has into the Avatar method, but maybe he should look into and use some of that funding for other forms of ways in which we can conquer aging. So definitely, there's so many different ways, and we talked about some of them, and there's even more that we didn't even talk about. So just takes one of those to work, and there we go. So those are my final thoughts.
All right, my final thoughts. It doesn't. So I understand a lot of you might not agree with transhumanists. That's why I went over death, right? Multiple different kinds of death, and we talked about solutions for each one.
You broke up a lot. You broke up a lot. Start over again.
So we had so in this podcast we talked about 7 different kinds of death. So even if you disagree with me, or you disagree with Rowan, or you disagree with Max, we've given you 7 different ways to conceptualize your death, and whichever one you agree with is fine, because we gave you multiple solutions for each one. So what life extension, what immortalism, what transhumanism means to you is for you to decide which of these 7 forms of death is real death, and then which of our solutions would you like to apply to that form of death. And I'd say we've accomplished what we set out to accomplish. So take what you will from this podcast, see which of these theories of death you agree with, and which solution would you like to apply to it. And that's all I have to say about that.
All right. Oh yeah, and go subscribe to all the channels in the description of this YouTube video, and make sure you click the bell and everything. Click the bell. I was supposed to click the thing, and it was supposed to do the thing, but it's not doing it. It's not working. What the heck? All right, that's it. Thank you, guys.
May you live forever, and death to the Reaper.
Yes.
Peace out.
Peace out.